At dawn, Arthur Vale stood near Hangar 12 with an old blue toolbox at his feet. His old tools made them doubt him.
We will continue without your advice.
To Arthur, the aircraft was already telling a different story.
The right side sounds different.
Arthur trusted the sound. He had heard that pattern before.
They missed the first sign.
Hidden beneath the calm rhythm of metal and engines. Mara Ellison noticed what the others ignored.
What did you hear?
Arthur was not guessing. He was listening.
The pulse comes first.
Then he heard it again. A small change. A familiar rhythm.
There. That is the sound.
A warning no screen had explained yet. And before anyone understood why that brass mirror mattered, the moment had already become the beginning of the truth. Only later would that mirror matter. Later, people would understand what that moment meant. They would see the billionaire stepping over the old mechanic's mirror and recognize the cruelty in it instantly. They would understand that Julian Mercer had not only stepped over a tool, he had stepped over experience, warning, poverty, and truth. But at that moment, outside the fence of Hangar 12, nobody saw the symbol. They only saw an old man being dragged away from an aircraft he had no permission to touch. The only person who did not laugh was Mara Ellison. Mara was not an engineer or a mechanic. She was an operations coordinator, the kind of employee important men rarely noticed until something went wrong. She handled access badges, schedules, vendor records, inspection rooms, maintenance logs, and all the quiet details that allowed Mercer Aerotech to look organized from the outside. She had worked there for 11 years, long enough to know the difference between a company that talked about safety and a company that truly listened to warnings. And the look on Arthur Vale's face bothered her. He did not look like a confused old man. He did not look like someone trying to cause trouble. He looked like a man who had heard danger before anyone else recognized it. Even after Julian humiliated him, even after the guards dragged him away and his tools scattered across the concrete, Arthur kept looking past the people and toward the aircraft. That was what Mara could not forget. Most people, when insulted that publicly, would stare at the person who hurt them. Arthur looked at the machine. After security left him near the service road, Mara found him kneeling beside the curb, placing his tools back into the dented blue box one by one. He did not seem surprised when she approached. Men who spend their lives around failing machines often know when something is coming before it arrives. She asked how he knew about the right wing. Arthur did not give her a resume. He did not defend his pride. He only explained what he had heard. The engine note was clean, he said, but beneath it there had been a second rhythm, a small pulsing tremor that did not match fan speed, hydraulic cycling, or actuator movement. When the warnings appeared, they appeared in the wrong order for a software fault. Something physical was lying to the control system before the control system began protecting itself. Mara had listened to expensive consultants talk for 3 weeks. They used larger words than Arthur, but Arthur made more sense. Then she asked what would happen if Julian ran the test again. Arthur looked toward the hangar and said the aircraft would probably shut itself down again. But the repeated false response could begin stressing a secondary hydraulic isolation valve. If Mercer replaced that valve afterward, without finding the original source, the jet might pass one clean test and still carry the hidden fault into the air. That answer frightened Mara because it did not sound dramatic. It sounded practical. Inside the hangar, Julian was already demanding another run. Mara had a choice. She could return to her desk. She could tell herself she was not qualified, not responsible, and not brave enough to risk her job for a stranger. She could do what people inside large companies learn to do when instinct warns them, but their paycheck tells them to stay quiet. She could wait until the failure became undeniable and then claim she had never known enough to act. But silence, she had learned, was not neutral. Sometimes silence was only obedience wearing a safer name. So she brought Arthur back in. She did not make a scene. She used an old parts corridor, a canceled vendor badge, and a maintenance observation room no executive had visited in months. Arthur clipped the borrowed badge to his old jacket without even reading the name. He had spent most of his life in places where the label on a person's chest mattered less than whether that person could hear when a machine was in trouble. From the observation room above the hangar floor, Arthur watched the next test begin. Below them, the Meridian X7 came alive again. Dr. Evan Rusk, Mercer Aerotech's Vice President of Advanced Systems, stood near the main diagnostic station with the calm posture of a man who believed every room belonged to him. Rusk was not foolish, and that made him dangerous. For 3 weeks, he had guided the investigation towards software anomalies, supplier defects, and isolated sensor failures. He had dismissed early concerns about vibration near the right-wing route, not by destroying them, but by burying them under categories that made them look unimportant. Arthur did not know all of that yet, but he knew the type. Aviation had always had men who believed truth could be managed politically. They treated machines as if machines cared about schedules, investors, reputations, or titles. But aircraft do not care about any of those things. A hidden fault does not become safer because a billionaire needs a demonstration flight. Sooner or later, the machine demands payment. As the engines rose, Arthur placed one hand lightly against the metal frame of the observation window. He was too far from the aircraft to diagnose by touch, but vibration travels through structures in patterns most people never notice. Mara watched his face. His eyes narrowed before the first alarm appeared. He knew before the screens knew. Then the warnings returned. This time, a new message appeared beneath the others. The secondary hydraulic isolation response had delayed. Mara felt the air leave her lungs. Arthur had predicted it. On the hangar floor, Rusk immediately recommended replacing the hydraulic isolation valve and related module. It sounded decisive. It sounded expensive. It sounded like progress. But Arthur's expression tightened. To him, the new warning was not the cause. It was only the bruise left by the original injury. He asked Mara for the maintenance records from the last major modification near the right wing. Mara hesitated only once. Then she opened the files. 6 months earlier, the Meridian X7 had undergone a luxury cabin refit, acoustic upgrades, environmental system changes, and structural access work near the wing carry-through. The work had been finished ahead of schedule. Every inspection box had initials. Every approval line looked clean. Too clean. Arthur searched not for what was written, but for what should have been written and was missing. He saw vague language where precise torque confirmation should have appeared. He saw a late-night sign-off from a technician ID used on overlapping work. He saw a photo attachment briefly flagged as non-conforming, then marked resolved. When the photo opened, Mara thought it looked ordinary. Arthur did not. The image showed a vibration-dampening bracket near the lower right wing root. Beneath one edge sat a thin shim, a spacer inserted where the bracket should have seated flush. To a casual eye, it was almost invisible. To Arthur, it was the kind of shortcut that turns a small alignment issue into a hidden amplifier. Under light load, the assembly would behave. under rising thrust, vibration could travel through the shim, reach the nearby control feedback harness, and create a false stabilizer signal. The computer would believe the aircraft's tail surface had moved when it had not. The hydraulic system would try to correct a lie. The correction would create pressure disturbances and thermal echoes. The screens would show unrelated warnings because the aircraft was reporting symptoms from a hidden cause. The experts had been chasing ghosts. Arthur had found the grave. Then he saw the reference number attached to the retrofit kit, and his hand went still. Project Larkspur. Mara noticed the change in him immediately. Until that moment, Arthur had been focused, tired, and steady. Now something old moved behind his eyes, something heavier than a technical problem. Project Larkspur was not just a design file, it was a wound. 16 years earlier, Arthur Vale had been one of the best practical maintenance minds in an experimental aviation program, studying vibration and control feedback. He did not have the highest degree in the room, but he often found the fault first. He could hear a bearing starting to fail before a sensor trend caught it. He could feel through a wrench when a bracket was seating wrong. Back then, people listened. Then a prototype aircraft suffered a serious control anomaly during a storm approach. The official investigation blamed improper maintenance oversight. Arthur was the senior mechanic on paper, and paper mattered more than truth when frightened executives needed a simple conclusion. He lost his certification, his job, his reputation, and eventually the house he had shared with his wife, Evelyn. He tried to appeal, but records went missing. Raw data was withheld, and legal letters arrived faster than hope. When Evelyn became ill, he chose medicine over lawyers. After she died, the last person who fully believed him was gone. For 16 years, Arthur lived as the man officially blamed. Now the same family of vibration control ideas had returned inside Mercer's flagship jet, carrying the same kind of warning he had once tried to explain. Mara did not know the whole story, but she could feel its weight. She printed the inspection photo before the system locked the record again. Arthur took the brass mirror from his toolbox and wiped it with his sleeve. Then he told her they needed to open the right-wing panel before Rusk replaced the hydraulic module and buried the evidence beneath a false repair. Getting to the aircraft was easier than it should have been. In large companies, everyone assumes someone else has checked the person walking with purpose. Mara carried a clipboard. Arthur carried a toolbox. Together, they looked official enough to cross half the hangar before anyone questioned them. At the right-wing root, Arthur knelt with effort. His knee stiffened badly, but he did not complain. Pain had become background noise long ago. He loosened the panel fasteners and angled the brass mirror into the narrow space behind the structure. There it was, the shim. The bracket showed faint fretting marks where vibration had worked against the support. The nearby control feedback harness had a polished gray shine along its outer insulation. Not cut, not failed, but rubbed and compressed by repeated contact. It was exactly the kind of damage that could escape a standard continuity test and still corrupt a signal under load. Arthur did not celebrate being right. Good mechanics do not celebrate danger. Then Dr. Evan Rusk saw him. At first, Rusk did not shout. He did not need to. His body simply went still near the diagnostic station. His eyes fixed on the open panel, on the old man kneeling beside the right-wing root, on the brass mirror angled into the dark space where no unauthorized person was supposed to look. For one brief second, the calm professional mask slipped from his face. What appeared beneath it was not confusion. It was fear. Julian Mercer followed Rusk's gaze and turned toward the right wing. His expression changed so quickly that several mechanics stepped back before he even spoke. Less than an hour earlier, Julian had ordered the old man dragged away from the fence. Now that same old man was inside the hangar, beside the flagship aircraft, holding the kind of evidence that could turn an engineering failure into a corporate scandal. Julian crossed the hangar floor with security behind him. He accused Arthur of trespassing. He accused Mara of violating restricted access. He accused the mechanics nearby of allowing a dangerous breach near a multi-million-dollar aircraft. He did not ask what Arthur had found. He did not look into the open panel. He only understood one thing. A man he had humiliated was now standing too close to the truth. Arthur rose slowly. His knee made the movement difficult, and the hangar saw that too. He did not look powerful. He looked like an old mechanic who had spent too many years carrying pain quietly. But behind him, the open panel spoke louder than status. The shim was there. The rubbed harness was there. The fretting on the bracket was there. The aircraft had hidden the answer in plain structure, and Arthur had found it. Rusk stepped in with careful timing. He did not deny the shim. That would have sounded defensive. Instead, he framed the discovery as contaminated. Arthur had no active certification, no authorization, and no chain of custody protection. Once an unauthorized outsider opened the panel, Rusk said, no one could know whether the harness had been disturbed or whether any evidence inside could be trusted. Then he used the word that made the hangar colder. Sabotage. He did not say Arthur had done it. He only said the company had to consider the possibility. A disgraced former mechanic with a personal history involving aircraft control failures had entered the facility under false credentials and accessed a critical system area. The sentence was polished, cautious, and poisonous. A broken aircraft was complicated. A saboteur was easy. Mara felt the room shift. She understood what Rusk was doing. He was not trying to prove Arthur wrong. He was trying to make Arthur unusable. If Arthur became a contamination risk, the evidence could be delayed. If he became a possible saboteur, his warning could become motive. If Mara became the employee who let him in, her concern could be framed as recklessness instead of courage. Arthur had seen this kind of burial before. 16 years earlier, the words had been different, but the shape was the same. Improper maintenance oversight, failure to verify, inadequate detection, terms clean enough for reports, heavy enough to crush a life. Back then, men in quiet rooms had taken a complicated failure and arranged it until it pointed at the person least able to fight back. But this time, Arthur was not alone outside the fence. Cal Benton, an older Mercer mechanic, stepped closer to the open panel. He looked at the shim, then at the harness, then at Rusk. Cal had worked around aircraft too long to pretend the old man had invented what they were seeing. He had laughed earlier, not because Arthur was funny, but because fear and exhaustion had made him weak. Now he had seen enough. Cal said the panel should be photographed as found and tested before anything was replaced. Arthur's theory could be checked safely, without running the engines. A controlled vibration trace at the wing root, while monitoring the feedback harness and hydraulic response, would show the order clearly. If Arthur was wrong, the data would clear the concern. If he was right, the false signal would appear before the hydraulic dip. Rusk rejected the test too quickly. That was his mistake. In a technical room, speed can reveal fear. Another mechanic said the test would take less than 15 minutes. A younger technician admitted that vibration near the right wing root had been mentioned during the first week, but the concern had been redirected towards software. Someone else remembered an inspection note that disappeared from the active troubleshooting package after Rusk reviewed it. Truth entered the hangar trembling, but it entered. Julian sensed control slipping away. He hated it. But there were too many witnesses now. Too many eyes on the open panel. Too many mechanics beginning to understand that the old man had found the physical origin of a failure their screens had only translated into symptoms. If Julian refused the test, it would look like fear. So he allowed it, but only after warning that when the test proved nothing, Arthur would be removed, Mara would face consequences, and the company would treat the breach with full seriousness. Arthur did not react. He stepped back and let licensed Mercer technicians place the sensors. That mattered. He did not need to touch anything else. He had already shown them where to look. Now the machine itself would speak. The vibration unit was attached near the right wing root. The feedback harness was monitored. The hydraulic isolation response was tracked. The main screen displayed all 3 traces in sequence. Rusk stood near the diagnostic station, his arms folded, his face professionally blank. Julian stood beside him, ready to turn the old man's failure into a lesson for everyone watching. Mara remained near the tool cart, holding the printed inspection photo like a fragile shield. For the first few seconds, nothing happened. The traces stayed calm. A few executives near the glass offices exchanged looks, already preparing to believe this had all been an embarrassing waste of time. Rusk's posture loosened by a fraction. Julian's mouth tightened into the beginning of satisfaction. Then the frequency increased. A small ripple appeared on the feedback line. It was subtle, almost nothing. The kind of signal that would have been dismissed as noise if no one had known to watch for it. But Arthur's eyes did not leave the screen. The ripple sharpened. The stabilizer feedback channel flickered, showing a disagreement that lasted barely long enough to register. 3 seconds later, the hydraulic isolation response delayed. Then the same chain of ghost warnings began to form in miniature. The order was undeniable. The false stabilizer signal came first. The hydraulic dip came second. The thermal spike came third. The room went silent. It was not the silence of confusion anymore. It was the silence of a lie losing protection. The aircraft had repeated Arthur's theory in front of the people who tried to mock it out of existence. The computer hadn't failed first. The hydraulic system hadn't failed first. The software had not invented the problem. The first wrongness came from the area Arthur had named while standing outside the fence. Julian stared at the data as if wealth could make numbers rearrange themselves. Rusk recovered faster. He said the result was interesting, but not conclusive. It still did not prove when the shim was installed. It did not prove the harness condition existed before Arthur opened the panel. He tried to pull the room back into uncertainty, back into procedure, back into fog. Then Mara placed the archived inspection photo onto the main screen. The same bracket appeared, the same shim, the same harness routed too close. The timestamp was 6 months old. Arthur could not have planted a shim 6 months before he entered the hangar. He could not have damaged a harness in a photograph taken long before anyone knew his name. He could not have invented the sequence that the vibration trace had just reproduced. The sabotage theory collapsed under the cold simplicity of time. Then Mara enlarged the approval section of the file. The final sign-off belonged to Dr. Evan Rusk. A low murmur moved through the hangar. It did not become loud. It did not need to. Everyone understood what they were seeing. The man who had dismissed the vibration notes redirected the investigation accused Arthur of contamination, and recommended replacing the wrong module, had also approved the refit record containing the very shortcut now exposed in the right wing. Rusk's face lost color. Julian turned toward him, not with moral outrage, but with the fury of a man discovering that the person beside him might become expensive. For Julian, the danger was not yet the passengers who could have flown on that aircraft. It was not the mechanics nearly blamed for a decision above them. It was liability. Headlines, canceled orders, investors. The possibility that the old man he stepped over would become the most credible person in the building. Before Julian could reshape the moment, the hangar doors opened. Helena Cross entered with 2 safety committee investigators and a legal observer. Helena did not move quickly, yet everyone made space for her. Authority looks different when it does not need to perform. Mara had sent her the inspection photo through a protected reporting channel minutes earlier, along with a note that Arthur's predicted sequence had been reproduced. Helena had spent years watching companies turn warnings into paperwork, and paperwork into delay. She knew enough to come in person. Julian tried to greet her with controlled surprise. He began explaining that the situation was complicated, that unauthorized access had disrupted the investigation, and that Mercer Aerotech was handling the matter internally. Helena listened with the patience of someone allowing a man to build his own trap out loud. Then she looked at the screen. The vibration trace remained displayed. The archived photo remained beside it. Rusk's approval line sat beneath the enlarged image. The open panel remained visible near the right wing. No speech could make those things disappear. Helena asked why the aircraft had been prepared for another test after repeated flight control lockouts. She asked why the vibration concern had not been elevated after the first week. She asked why a non-conforming bracket image had been marked, resolved without formal deviation documentation. She asked why the person who approved the refit had not disclosed the relevance of that approval during the troubleshooting investigation. Nobody answered quickly. That was answer enough. Julian tried to argue that grounding the aircraft without full executive review would create unnecessary panic and damage a major international sale. Helena told him that panic was not caused by grounding an unsafe aircraft. Panic was caused by pretending it was safe because the contract was large. The sentence landed like a verdict. She grounded the Meridian X7 immediately. No taxi test, no demonstration flight, no replacement of the hydraulic module until the right wing structure, bracket seat, feedback harness, and isolation valve were independently inspected. Helena Cross ordered all refit records preserved, all footage secured, and all personnel involved in the modification separated from the aircraft until formal statements were taken. The Meridian X7 was no longer a luxury product waiting for a buyer. It was evidence. Julian hated that word. Evidence meant the aircraft no longer belonged entirely to his schedule, his public relations team, or his money. Evidence meant order. Evidence meant timestamps. Evidence meant people who were used to being ignored could suddenly become witnesses. He tried to argue that the grounding was premature, that the foreign buyer would interpret it as instability, that the board would demand explanations, that investors would panic. But every objection made him look less like a leader protecting an aircraft and more like a man protecting a sale. Helena did not raise her voice. She did not need to. She reminded him that an aircraft with repeated control warnings, unexplained vibration traces, and a documented refit anomaly did not fly simply because a billionaire needed it to. The hangar listened to her because she spoke the way safety is supposed to sound. Calm, precise, and completely unmoved by pressure. Mara stood several feet away, still holding the printed inspection photo. Her hands had stopped trembling, but her face had not recovered. She knew she had crossed lines. She knew a canceled badge and an old corridor would not look clean in any official report. But she also knew what would have happened if she had gone back to her desk and let Rusk replace the hydraulic module first. The real fault would have been hidden beneath a false repair, and the next clean test might have become the most dangerous one. Helena seemed to understand that. She did not excuse the access breach, but she protected Mara as a reporting witness. That detail angered Julian almost as much as the grounding. He wanted someone punished quickly. Punishment could have helped him control the story. If Mara was reckless, then Arthur was a trespasser. If Arthur was a trespasser, then the evidence was contaminated. If the evidence was contaminated, then the aircraft could return to the language Julian preferred. Internal review, proprietary assessment, and temporary irregularity. Helena denied him that escape. Arthur listened without expression. He was not celebrating. His eyes remained on the aircraft. To him, the Meridian had not been fixed. It had only been heard. Men like Julian loved moments of public victory or defeat. Mechanics cared about what the machine would do tomorrow. A grounded aircraft was safer than a flying lie, but it was still a problem waiting to be understood completely. Dr. Rusk was placed on temporary administrative restriction pending review. He requested counsel almost immediately. He gathered his folder with careful hands and avoided looking at Arthur as he left the hangar floor. That avoidance told Arthur more than any confession could have. Rusk was not a man surprised by the evidence. He was a man surprised that evidence had survived. As the hangar began to clear, Helena approached Arthur. For the first time that day, someone with authority asked him who he was before deciding what he was. Arthur gave his name. Helena repeated it softly, and something shifted in her expression. She knew the name. Not from Mercer's current staff list, not from the borrowed badge on his jacket, but from an old aviation safety file that had never fully settled. Arthur Vale. Project Larkspur. The past, which Arthur had spent years trying to survive rather than explain, rose into the room. Helena asked whether he had worked on Larkspur 16 years earlier. Arthur confirmed it, but he did not offer the story. He had no desire to open that wound in front of Julian, Rusk's legal shadow, and half a hangar of people who had laughed at him before lunch. But Helena already understood enough. Years earlier, an independent review had questioned parts of the Larkspur finding, though the record had never been fully reopened because key raw data was missing and the original company had collapsed into asset transfers. Arthur's hand tightened around the toolbox handle. For 16 years, the official world had treated him as a concluded matter, a failed mechanic, a revoked license, a cautionary footnote. Now someone was saying the conclusion had been questioned, not in rumors, but in review. Did not feel like triumph. It felt like grief arriving late with documents in its hands. Mara looked from Helena to Arthur and understood that the old man's connection to the Meridian was deeper than instinct. The failure inside the modern jet was echoing the failure that had destroyed his life. Helena ordered her team to pull every Mercer archive connected to Larkspur-derived architecture. Julian objected immediately, using words like proprietary limits, acquisition complexity, and irrelevant history. Helena did not argue emotionally. She simply stated, that if Larkspur-derived systems appeared in the Meridian X7's control feedback design, then historical warnings were relevant to an active grounding. That ended the objection for the moment. But the real fight had only begun. Mercer Aerotech became quieter, and that quiet worried Mara more than shouting would have. The public relations team drafted careful language about a temporary safety pause. Legal counsel began separating documents into categories. Executives stopped speaking freely in hallways. Mechanics who had been ignored for weeks suddenly found their old notes requested by investigators. The hangar was no longer only a place where a jet had failed. It was a place where blame was being assigned, and everyone understood that powerful people would try to send it downward if they could. Arthur was taken to a glass conference room for a formal statement. The room had a long table, polished walls, and framed photographs of Mercer aircraft in perfect flight. Arthur sat at one end with his toolbox on the floor beside him. A security manager suggested removing it. Helena quietly told him not to. She may not have understood every tool in that box, but she understood enough to know that some objects are not weapons. They are the last proof of a life other people tried to erase. Mara sat nearby, pale but steady. She knew her job might not survive. She also knew that if Arthur had been right about the aircraft, then bringing him inside had not been recklessness. It had been the only reason the truth reached the panel before the false repair did. The questions began with what Arthur heard at the fence, what he predicted before the second test, what he saw in the refit photo, and what he found in the open panel. He did not exaggerate. He did not insult anyone. He described sequence, cause, and effect. That calm made his testimony stronger. Men who lie often decorate their stories. Arthur had spent a lifetime around machines, and machines punish decoration. One thing happens, then another thing happens. Because of it, the order matters. Then Julian's counsel asked about his revoked certification. There it was, the old stain placed carefully on the table. Arthur answered truthfully. His certification had been revoked after the Larkspur accident. He had appealed briefly, then stopped when his wife became ill, and the cost of fighting exceeded anything they had left. The official report blamed maintenance oversight, though Arthur had maintained from the beginning that the control feedback anomaly began before the event cited against him. Julian's counsel did not need to accuse him of anything new. The old accusation was useful enough. In corporate rooms, a damaged record can be used like smoke. It does not have to prove guilt. It only has to make people squint. Mara could not stay silent. She explained that Arthur identified the wing route before he entered the facility, before he accessed the records, before he opened the panel, and before anyone showed him the Larkspur reference. She explained that his warning about the hydraulic isolation valve came before the new warning appeared. She explained that the archived photo proved the shim existed long before Arthur was anywhere near the aircraft. Her voice shook at first, but facts steadied it. Julian accused her of emotional judgment. He suggested she had been manipulated by sympathy for a stranger. He reminded the room that she was not a mechanic, not an engineer, and not qualified to interpret aircraft systems. It was a cruel tactic because it dressed decency as incompetence. Arthur looked at him then. He did not raise his voice. He simply said that Mara had done what every safety manual claimed employees should do. She escalated a credible concern when the normal chain failed. If Mercer punished her for that, then the aircraft was not the only broken system in the building. For several seconds, no one spoke. Julian looked away first. That small movement did not restore Arthur's name. It did not fix the aircraft. It did not end the investigation, but everyone in the room felt the balance shift. The old man had not defended himself with anger. He had defended the person with less power. That is often how real character appears, not when victory is certain, but when punishment is still possible. By evening, the first version of the public story began leaking. Mercer's communications team tried to control it. They released a statement about an isolated configuration irregularity and a temporary safety review. They did not mention Arthur Vale. They did not mention the shim. They did not mention Julian's mockery at the fence or Rusk's attempt to turn the discovery into a sabotage concern. Companies often begin lying not by saying what is false, but by choosing which truths never enter the sentence. Then a financial news site published a harsher version, citing unnamed sources who claimed the Meridian investigation had been complicated by the involvement of a disgraced former mechanic tied to an old aviation accident. The article questioned Arthur's credibility. It described Mara's actions as unauthorized. It suggested internal experts were concerned about contamination, personal motives, and interference with proprietary systems. Arthur read the article on Mara's phone in silence. His name was once again attached to disgrace. For 16 years, he had lived under an official conclusion he could not afford to fight. The words were not new, but they cut differently now, because, for one day, he had allowed himself to believe truth might arrive cleanly. He should have known better. Truth often has to pass through mud before anyone admits it is water. Mara apologized, though she had not written the article. Arthur told her the company was doing what companies do when the witness is more dangerous than the failure. They could not yet defeat the evidence, so they were attacking the person who found it. But Julian had forgotten about his own cameras. Mercer Aerotech recorded nearly everything inside Hangar 12. The cameras had been installed to monitor workers, reduce liability, and protect company property. They recorded Arthur at the fence. They recorded Julian mocking him. They recorded the guards dragging him away. They recorded the tool spilling and the brass mirror sliding across the concrete. They recorded Arthur predicting the hydraulic warning before the second test. They recorded Rusk resisting the vibration trace, the archived photo on the screen, and the moment the room saw Rusk's approval line. The system designed to watch workers had watched the executives too. Mara knew where the safety archive copies were stored. Before her access could be fully restricted, she sent Helena the camera labels and timestamps through the protected reporting line. It was not a leak, it was preservation. There is a difference between exposing a company for entertainment and protecting evidence before powerful people can make it disappear. That night, Arthur returned to the small rented room above an old appliance repair shop where he lived. He had no real home in the way people meant the word. The room held a narrow bed, a hot plate, 2 shirts hanging from a pipe, old maintenance manuals, and a window that rattled whenever aircraft passed overhead. For years, the sound of planes had been both comfort and punishment. He could not stop listening to them, even after the world told him he no longer had the right to work on them. He placed the toolbox on the bed and opened it. The brass inspection mirror lay inside, scratched at the edges, its surface dulled by years of use. Arthur wiped it clean. In the mirror, he saw not only the tool, but the moment Julian stepped over it. He thought of Evelyn then, as he often did when a day wounded him more deeply than he wanted to admit. Evelyn had been the one person who never believed the official report. She had written letters, saved documents, and reminded him that losing a license did not mean losing the truth. Near the end of her illness, when Arthur had stopped fighting because medicine mattered more than lawyers. She told him that machines had always known who he was, even when men forgot. Arthur had not opened the storage box she left behind in years. Now he pulled it from the closet. Inside were old envelopes, faded photographs, unpaid medical notices he had never been able to throw away, and one small notebook wrapped in cloth. Arthur recognized it immediately. His shop notebook from the Larkspur years. He had thought it was lost. Maybe part of him had wanted to think that, because losing it hurt less than admitting he had been afraid to open the past. Between the pages, Evelyn had tucked a letter. Arthur unfolded it slowly. She had written it near the end, when her handwriting had begun to weaken, but her mind remained sharp. She told him that if the truth ever found him again, he should not turn away because of her. She knew he had chosen her care over the legal fight, and she did not want that choice to become another prison. She wrote that love was not the same as surrender. She wrote that if his name could still be restored someday, he should let it be restored. Arthur read the letter twice. For years, he had believed that choosing Evelyn over the appeal meant accepting the lie forever. Her words released him from a guilt he had carried so quietly that even he had stopped naming it. The dead cannot return what was stolen, but sometimes they can give the living permission to want it back. The notebook was rough, stained, and full of hand-drawn diagrams. It contained warnings about vibration-induced false feedback in lightweight control structures. It described dampening brackets, preload checks, harness clearance, and the danger of relying only on static testing when vibration was the real trigger. One phrase appeared more than once in Arthur's cramped handwriting. A bracket seated wrong can make the machine hear a ghost. The next morning, Helena's team found the first matching Larkspur file in Mercer's archive. It was an old technical memo, transferred during an acquisition years earlier. The memo described the same danger in cleaner language. It warned that a shimmed bracket could create a hidden path for vibration and make a control system believe a stabilizer had moved when it had not. Arthur read it in silence. The words were formal, but the thought beneath them was painfully familiar. Some of it had come from him. Years earlier, before the Larkspur accident, Arthur had written practical warnings after late-night tests. Engineers had laughed at his phrasing and then used the idea because it was right. After the accident, many of his notes disappeared from the official record. Now, similar warnings existed inside Mercer's archive without his name attached. Mara watched his face and understood the theft before he explained it. They had not only blamed him for failing to catch a danger he had warned them about. Somewhere along the chain, they had preserved his insight, stripped away his name, built new technology from it, ignored its limits, and then nearly blamed him again when the old danger returned. That kind of injustice is not merely professional. It is intimate. A man can steal your tool and leave you angry. But when they steal your warning, erase your name, and later punish you for recognizing the danger first, they are trying to decide who is allowed to speak reality itself. The first video clip appeared online later that day. It was short, shaky, and recorded by someone outside the service road. It showed Arthur being dragged from the fence while people inside the hangar laughed. The audio was poor, but Julian's posture was unmistakable. Viewers did not know the full story yet, but they saw enough to become curious. Why had a billionaire aviation CEO mocked an old man near a grounded jet? Why had the demonstration been canceled afterward? Why did the old man protect his toolbox like it held the last pieces of his life? Mercer's attempt to bury Arthur began to fail because curiosity does not obey press releases. Then the longer safety footage reached Helena's investigators. Within hours, the internal narrative collapsed further. The footage proved Arthur warned them before the new failure appeared. It proved Rusk resisted the test that confirmed the sequence. It proved Julian treated a safety warning as an insult because it came from the wrong kind of person. And when news of the archived photo spread inside the company, mechanics who had stayed silent began remembering things aloud. One refit technician admitted he had questioned the shim 6 months earlier. Another remembered being told the deviation was resolved above his level. Cal Benton submitted a statement acknowledging that workers had been trained, not formally but culturally, to stop writing concerns once leadership signaled impatience. None of them claimed innocence in a perfect way. That made their statements more believable. They had been afraid. They had been tired. They had survived by staying quiet. Now the aircraft had shown them what silence almost cost. Rusk was placed on formal suspension pending investigation. Julian did not defend him publicly. He began to distance himself with the speed of a man recognizing a sacrifice. He spoke of accountability, internal review, and his disappointment that critical information had not reached him clearly. But the cameras had already shown him ignoring the warning when it reached him in the plainest possible form. An old mechanic at the fence telling him where the fault lived. Rusk understood he was being prepared as the offering. That made him dangerous. Through counsel, he began producing emails showing the pressure Julian had placed on the Meridian team to maintain the demonstration schedule. None of the messages ordered anyone to install a shim or bury a warning. Men like Julian rarely write orders that way. They create conditions. They praise speed. They question delays. They make careers depend on impossible timelines, then act surprised when someone below them cuts a corner. Rusk's defense was not moral. It was survival. But survival has a way of dragging hidden truths into daylight. The two powerful men who had protected the same polished story began cutting each other with it. And then, late that night, Arthur received a phone call. The voice belonged to Raymond Sloan, a retired data analyst who had worked on the original Larkspur investigation. He was old now, thinner than Arthur remembered, his voice worn down by years of silence. Raymond said he had seen the news. He had seen Arthur's face. He had seen the phrase Project Larkspur return to public conversation. And for the first time in 16 years, silence felt heavier than fear. Arthur said nothing. Raymond continued anyway. During the original investigation, he had helped convert raw flight telemetry into simplified event timelines for the review board. The official summary blamed maintenance oversight. But the raw data, Raymond said, showed something different. The control feedback anomaly began before the maintenance event Arthur was blamed for failing to catch. In plain terms, the aircraft had started lying to itself before Arthur could have caused the chain they placed on him. Raymond had copied the raw data and hidden it. Fear had kept him silent. Guilt had kept him from destroying it. Arthur closed his eyes. For 16 years, he had imagined this moment in 100 different ways. He had imagined anger, shouting, relief, vindication. But when it came, he felt almost still. The body, after carrying pain long enough, sometimes receives impossible news, as if it is simply too tired to react. He did not forgive Raymond on that call. Forgiveness is not a switch old pain turns on because someone finally tells the truth. But he agreed to meet him because the data mattered more than the apology. The copy was held in a safe deposit box in Cincinnati under the name of Raymond's late sister. Helena arranged for an investigator to accompany them because chain of custody mattered now. The evidence had to be clean enough to survive the lawyers Julian Mercer could afford. Arthur traveled with Mara. In his jacket pocket, he carried Evelyn's letter. At his feet, as always, sat the blue toolbox. He did not need the tools for the meeting. He brought them because they were the only witnesses that had never left him. Raymond met them in a public library, older than Arthur remembered, bent inward by cowardice and regret. He did not ask for easy forgiveness. He explained what he had done, how the raw sequence differed from the summary, how his supervisor had pressured him to treat the anomaly as inconclusive, and how he convinced himself that reopening the matter would destroy his family without saving Arthur. Arthur listened. He saw a man who had failed him. He also saw a man finally bringing forward the one thing powerful people had kept hidden. Human beings, Arthur knew, were more complicated than machines. Machines fail according to conditions. People fail according to fear. At the bank, the safe deposit box contained an old data cartridge, a printed index, and a letter from Raymond explaining why he had preserved it. The cartridge looked too small to carry the weight placed upon it. But Arthur knew small things could change everything. A shim, a wire, a missing line of data, a truth kept alive in the dark. Helena's team extracted the telemetry with help from a specialist who could still read the obsolete format. The process took hours. Arthur waited in a small municipal aviation office with Mara beside him, staring at a framed picture of an aircraft lifting into a blue sky. He wondered how many beautiful machines had carried ugly secrets, because men on the ground were too proud to stop them. When Helena entered, she did not look triumphant. That told Arthur the truth had weight. The raw data confirmed Raymond's claim. The Larkspur control feedback anomaly began before the event cited against Arthur. The original report had not merely simplified the timeline, it had reversed its meaning. Arthur's maintenance oversight had been used as the clean explanation for a deeper design and vibration issue that management did not want to own. For 16 years, the report had treated him like the first failure in the chain. Now the machine from his past had finally spoken, and the report had reversed cause and effect. For years, Arthur had imagined that proof would feel like freedom. Instead, the first feeling was grief. He sat in the municipal aviation office with the raw telemetry summary on the table, and for several seconds, he could not move. The room around him seemed too clean for the truth it now contained. Fluorescent lights hummed above him. Mara sat beside him. Helena stood near the window with the expression of a woman who understood that official words could not return stolen years. Arthur thought of Evelyn. He saw her at the kitchen table, opening letters from agencies that never answered honestly. He saw the house they sold, when medical bills grew faster than hope. He saw the certification notice that ended the only work he had ever truly loved. He saw the faces of employers who read his record and became polite in the way people become polite when they have already decided no. He saw the apprentices he never trained, the aircraft he never signed off, and the nights when he woke, hearing alarms from a storm he had not caused. Proof did not give those years back. It only proved that the pain had been telling the truth. Mara placed her hand gently over his. This time, Arthur let it stay. Helena explained that the old Larkspur finding would not be overturned in a single afternoon. Institutions moved slowly, especially when admitting an old error meant admitting that real people had lived beneath it. But the evidence was now too strong to ignore. Arthur's notebook, Raymond's raw telemetry, the Mercer archive, Rusk's approval record, the Meridian X7 failure, the shimmed bracket, the rubbed harness, and the hangar footage all pointed in the same direction. A warning had been made. A warning had been buried. A system had been built from the buried warning. And when the same danger returned, the same kind of men had tried to bury the mechanic again. This time, they were too late. The deeper story broke the next morning. Nina Patel, an aviation safety journalist known for careful reporting rather than loud scandal, published the first full account. She did not write Arthur as a fairy tale hero or Julian as a simple villain. She explained the failure sequence, the physical evidence inside the right wing, the archived refit photo, the vibration trace, the Larkspur connection, Raymond's raw data, and the culture that allowed technical concerns to become inconvenient noise. Her headline described Arthur as the mechanic who heard the failure before the screens understood it. That line traveled everywhere. Pilots shared it. Mechanics shared it. Safety inspectors debated it. Aviation students began mapping the timeline. Ordinary people did not understand every detail of dampening brackets or feedback harnesses, but they understood the image of an old man at a fence, warning experts, being laughed away, and then being proven right by the very aircraft they said he had no right to approach. They understood Julian stepping over the mirror. That image became the symbol of the entire scandal. A billionaire stepping over the tool of the man who would save his aircraft. A company stepping over experience. An industry stepping over a warning because the person giving it looked poor, old, and inconvenient. Mercer Aerotech could no longer control the story. Julian tried it first. He released a statement praising the safety review and claiming the company had acted with caution once new information emerged. But the footage made those words look thin. The cameras showed Arthur's warning. They showed Julian's mockery. They showed the guards pulling him away. They showed Rusk resisting the simple test. They showed Julian objecting to the grounding because of the demonstration schedule. It was difficult to claim caution when the world had watched you treat caution like an insult. The buyer suspended the fleet order. Regulators demanded records. Investors demanded leadership accountability. The board, which had once celebrated Julian's speed and confidence, now spoke in colder words. Governance, risk, oversight, exposure. Men like Julian often discover too late that the people who praise arrogance during profit will rename it recklessness during crisis. Rusk fell first. Investigators recovered the private message he believed had disappeared. It had survived in an automatic backup attached to a project management export. In that message, Rusk had discouraged formal deviation language about the shimmed bracket because it could trigger structural review and create schedule exposure. The phrase was polite, corporate, and damning. It showed exactly how danger becomes paperwork when the wrong person is trying to protect a calendar. Rusk was terminated for cause and referred for regulatory investigation. His professional reputation, built on precision and authority, began cracking beneath his own words. He had spent his career sounding careful. Now everyone could see that careful language had been used to hide careless judgment. Julian tried to make Rusk the entire scandal. He described himself as misled by advanced systems leadership. He spoke of disappointment. He promised reform. He praised the employees who had helped identify the concern, carefully avoiding the fact that one of those employees had to bring Arthur through an unofficial route because the official chain had failed. But Rusk, facing ruin, refused to become the only sacrifice. Through counsel, he produced emails showing Julian's repeated pressure to keep the demonstration flight on schedule, despite unresolved modification concerns. None of the emails ordered anyone to commit misconduct in plain language. They did something more familiar and harder to prosecute. They created pressure. They rewarded speed. They punished delay. They made everyone understand what kind of truth leadership preferred. The two men who had once protected the same polished story began cutting each other with pieces of it. That was poetic justice, not because it was loud, but because it was exact. For years inside Mercer Aerotech, pressure had flowed downward. Executives demanded impossible timelines. Managers softened warnings. Mechanics carried the risk. Now the pressure flowed upward. The records used to control workers became evidence against executives. The cameras installed to monitor the hangar became witnesses against its owner. The old Larkspur files that erased Arthur's name became proof that his warning had outlived the people who stole it. While the powerful fought, the mechanics repaired the aircraft. The Meridian X7 remained grounded under independent oversight. Its right-wing panels were open, its harnesses were tagged, its bracket was removed. Its structure was lit by inspection lamps. Without the polished skin hiding its inner spaces, the aircraft looked less like a luxury object and more like what every aircraft truly is. A promise made out of metal, wire, pressure, tolerance, and trust. Arthur returned to Hangar 12 as an official technical witness. No one laughed this time. Cal Benton met him near the right-wing route. Shame sat plainly on the older mechanic's face. He had laughed at the fence. He had stayed quiet during the refit. He had survived in Mercer's culture by learning when not to challenge authority. Arthur did not demand an apology. He had little use for apology unless it changed what happened next. Cal understood that. He explained the repair plan with a humility that had not existed in the hangar before. The shim would be removed. The bracket seat would be restored and measured properly. The control feedback harness would be replaced and rerouted with correct clearance. The secondary hydraulic isolation valve would be inspected for stress from repeated false commands. The entire feedback loop would be recalibrated under staged vibration load, not only static conditions. Every aircraft that had received the same modification package would be inspected before returning to service. Arthur listened. He did not take over. He did not touch anything he was not authorized to touch. He had already been punished once by a world eager to blur technical truth with procedural accusation. This time, he remained careful. Licensed technicians performed the work. Arthur observed, asked questions, and gave advice only when invited. But everyone in the hangar felt the standard change around him. A young engineer asked whether the bracket preload should be verified again after the first vibration cycle, rather than only before panel closure. Arthur almost broke then. Not when Julian insulted him. Not when Rusk was exposed. Not when the raw data confirmed his old warning. But when a young engineer listened to his practical concern and wrote it down without making him prove that his experience deserved space on the page. Respect, when denied long enough, can feel almost unbearable when it finally returns. The repair took 2 days. They ran the vibration trace before closing the panel, then again after closing it, then again after the first controlled system cycle. The ghost signal did not return. The feedback channel stayed clean. The hydraulic isolation response remained stable. The bleed air spike vanished because it had never been the disease. It had only been the echo. On the final ground test, Hangar 12 filled with people in silence. The engine started. the sound rose smoothly through the space. Arthur stood several feet behind the main line with his toolbox at his feet, one hand resting lightly on the handle. He listened not for power, but for absence. The wrong pulse was gone. The right-wing root no longer carried that faint, false rhythm he had heard from outside the fence. The thrust increased through the range where the failure had always appeared. No stabilizer warning, no hydraulic dip, no thermal spike, no lockout. The Meridian X7 did not announce that it had been healed. It simply behaved. A quiet cheer moved through the hangar. Mechanics shook hands. Engineers exhaled. Mara covered her mouth with one hand. Cal looked down and wiped his face as if no one could see him. Helena watched Arthur, understanding that the moment belonged to him more than any press release would ever admit. Arthur did not smile broadly. His relief was deeper than expression. For the first time in 16 years, he had helped bring an aircraft back to truth in front of witnesses who could not erase him. The successful test did not save Julian. It made his position worse. If the aircraft had remained mysterious, he might have hidden behind complexity. But the fix proved Arthur had been right from the beginning. It proved the problem had not required weeks of executive theater, millions in unnecessary parts, or attacks on a poor old mechanic. It required opening the correct panel, respecting the first warning, and listening to someone who understood machines without needing permission from a billionaire. The board announced that Julian Mercer would step aside pending an independent governance review. They did not call it removal. Men with money often receive softer words on the way down than working people receive while falling. But everyone understood. Julian had built an empire on speed, image, and control. He lost control because a machine refused to carry his pride into the sky. Mara's suspension was lifted. More than that, Helena recommended her for a newly created protected escalation role, ensuring that non-engineering staff could raise safety concerns without being crushed by chain-of-command politics. Some executives called it an overcorrection. Helena called it overdue. Mara accepted, not because she wanted praise, but because she knew how close she had come to staying silent. She wanted the next person with a warning to have a better door than the one she had been forced to break open. The refit technicians who had raised concerns were cleared. Cal Benton submitted a statement, admitting that the hangar culture had trained workers to survive by becoming quiet. It was not an easy statement to write. It made him look weak in places, but it saved younger workers from carrying blame that belonged above them. And that was the first honest thing he had done in too long. Then came Arthur's hearing. The Aviation Authority reopened the Larkspur findings based on the raw telemetry, Raymond's testimony, Arthur's notebook, the Mercer archive, and the Meridian failure. It was not a grand courtroom moment. It was a modest regulatory office with a long table, cautious language, and people who understood that admitting an old mistake could embarrass institutions that preferred their past to remain settled. Arthur wore a dark jacket Mara helped him choose. He carried the toolbox anyway. No one asked him to. He brought it because some part of him needed the tools nearby when the world finally reconsidered the hands that had held them. Evelyn's letter rested in his inside pocket. Helena testified first about the Meridian failure and the Larkspur connection. Raymond testified next, older and shaken, explaining how the raw data had been reduced into a misleading summary and how fear kept him silent. Mara testified about the day at the fence, about Arthur's warning, about the decision to bring him inside, and about the way the aircraft proved the warning before the company accepted it. Cal submitted his statement, describing the repair and Arthur's diagnostic accuracy. Arthur spoke last. He did not ask the panel to pretend he had been perfect. He did not want a fairy tale. He wanted the sequence restored. He described the vibration concerns, the bracket preload warnings, the missing notes, the test night conditions, the raw data he requested but never received, and the official summary that placed cause after consequence and then called it truth. He spoke of Evelyn only briefly because grief was not evidence, but it was part of the cost. He explained that losing his certification had not only ended a job, it had removed him from the one language he had known since boyhood. The panel listened. Arthur had once spoken to rooms that were already closed against him. This room was not fully open, but it was no longer locked. When the questioning ended, the panel deliberated. Arthur waited in the hallway with Mara on one side and his toolbox on the floor beside his shoes. He did not pace. He had done enough waiting in his life to know that movement did not hurry judgment. Still, every minute carried the weight of 16 years. When the decision came, it arrived in careful language, as institutional truth often does. The original Larkspur finding would be amended. The agency acknowledged that the report had overemphasized maintenance oversight, while failing to properly account for vibration-induced control feedback anomalies that preceded the cited maintenance event. Arthur Vale's documented warnings would be added to the record. His professional standing would be restored for historical review purposes. His revoked certification, long expired under the original finding, would be reinstated in honorary status, with eligibility for supervised renewal if he chose to pursue it. The agency expressed regret. Regret. Such a small word for 16 years. Arthur lowered his head. Mara looked away to give him privacy. Helena did the same. Raymond covered his face at the far end of the hallway. Arthur thought of Evelyn, and grief arrived with gratitude tangled inside it. He wished she could have heard the decision. He wished it had come before the illness, before the house was gone, before shame became part of the air they breathed. But the truth had come at last. Late, wounded, imperfect, but real. And because it had come, the lie would not be the final thing written beside his name. Reporters waited outside the building. Some wanted anger. Some wanted revenge. Some wanted Arthur to condemn Julian, Rusk, the agency, and everyone who had failed him. But Arthur had spent enough of his life being used in other people's stories. He would not turn his pain into entertainment just because cameras had arrived. He spoke instead about listening. He said safety was not created by confidence. It was created by attention. It came from mechanics, technicians, inspectors, coordinators, and every person close enough to notice when something felt wrong. He reminded them that a machine does not care about titles, wealth, reputation, or pride. If a bracket is seated wrong, it is wrong. If a signal is false, it is false. If a warning comes from an old man at a fence, the warning does not become less true because the man's jacket is worn. That evening, the longer footage of Julian stepping over Arthur's fallen mirror was shown in a documentary segment about the Meridian scandal. The image became a symbol almost immediately. The public loved it because poetic justice is easier to understand when it fits in a single frame. Arthur saw something quieter. He saw the mirror. The next morning, he sat at the little table in his rented room and polished the brass inspection mirror with a soft cloth. Its surface was scratched. Its edges were worn. It did not reflect perfectly, but it reflected honestly enough. That had always been its purpose. It did not make hidden spaces beautiful. It made them visible. A week later, Mercer Aerotech invited Arthur back to Hangar 12. Not as a public relations ornament, though some people certainly wanted to use him that way. Helena made sure the invitation had substance. The company was creating a training program on practical fault recognition, safety escalation, and the danger of dismissing worker concerns. The young mechanics had asked for Arthur by name. He almost refused. The hangar still carried the echo of laughter. The fence, the guards, Julian's shoe stepping over the mirror, Rusk's sabotage accusation, all of it still lived there. But Mara reminded him that places do not become clean because good people leave them. They become clean when someone teaches the next generation not to repeat what happened there. Arthur returned. On his first morning as a training consultant, he stood beside an opened airframe in front of a group of apprentices. Some had degrees. Some had grease under their nails already. Some were young enough to believe modern diagnostics would catch every danger before human hands needed to. Arthur did not shame them for that. He opened his toolbox and placed the brass mirror on the bench. Then he placed Evelyn's letter beside it, folded closed, not for them to read, but for himself to remember why truth must be defended before people are forced to spend their lives proving they deserved it. He began with a simple lesson. A bracket can look seated and still be wrong. A harness can test clean and still lie under vibration. A screen can show symptoms without showing origin. A room full of experts can miss what one careful person hears, if the room has already decided who is worth listening to. The apprentices leaned forward. Arthur lifted the mirror and angled it into the dark space behind the training panel. In the small reflection, they saw what direct sight could not show. Hidden brackets, tight clearances, a road where vibration might travel. Nothing dramatic, nothing glowing red. Just the kind of ordinary place where danger waits when pride moves too fast. Arthur told them never to trust a closed panel simply because someone powerful was tired of waiting. Cal stood at the back of the room, listening. Mara stood near the door, now officially responsible for making sure warnings had a path. Helena watched from the corridor for a moment, then walked away without interrupting. The best reforms are not always announced. Sometimes they are practiced quietly until they become normal. Months passed. The Meridian X7 returned to service only after independent verification. Other aircraft touched by the same modification package were inspected. New reporting protections were created. Concern logs could no longer be buried by one executive's preference. Safety meetings began with uncomfortable questions instead of polished confidence. Julian disappeared from daily leadership. Rusk's case moved through regulators. Mercer Aerotech survived, but it did not survive unchanged. The company learned, painfully, that the cost of listening early is always smaller than the cost of being forced to listen later. Arthur never became rich. He did not want to. He did not move into a large house or become a celebrity expert with a glossy office. He kept a small room for a while, then accepted a modest apartment closer to the training facility because his knees were getting worse, and Mara insisted the stairs were trying to kill him. He complained about the move, but not very convincingly. On quiet evenings, he still heard aircraft pass overhead. The sound no longer punished him. Sometimes it reminded him of Evelyn. Sometimes it reminded him of the years that were gone. But sometimes, more often than before, it sounded like work still worth doing. One afternoon, after a training session, a young apprentice stayed behind. He was nervous, holding a report form in both hands. He told Arthur he had noticed a tiny vibration during a bench test, but he was not sure it meant anything. He was afraid of wasting everyone's time. Arthur looked at the form, then at the young man. For a moment, he saw himself decades earlier, standing in a room where his warning was treated as inconvenience. He saw the fence. He saw the mirror on the concrete. He saw Julian's polished shoe stepping over it. Then he looked at the apprentice and handed him a pen. He told him uncertainty was exactly where safety begins. The apprentice wrote the concern down. It turned out to be minor, a loose mount, easy to fix, no scandal, no headlines, no billionaire losing control in front of cameras. Just a small warning caught early, because someone had been taught not to stay silent. Arthur considered that one of the greatest victories of his life, because justice is not only when the powerful fall. Sometimes justice is when the next frightened person speaks sooner. Years later, people would still tell the story of the old mechanic at the fence. They would talk about the billionaire, the private jet, the hidden shim, the raw data, the exposed executive, and the mirror on the ground. They would call it unbelievable because people like stories where arrogance is punished and truth returns at the perfect moment. Arthur knew the truth was less perfect than that. Truth had come late. It had left scars. It had not saved Evelyn. It had not returned the house. It had not given him back the strength of his younger hands. But it had returned his name to him. It had changed a hangar. It had taught young workers that warnings do not become worthless because they come from someone without power. And maybe that was enough. On his final day of the first training cycle, Arthur stood inside Hangar 12 near the same fence where he had once been thrown out. The Meridian X7 rested in the distance, quiet and repaired. The brass mirror sat in his toolbox, scratched but clean. Mara joined him for a moment, and neither of them spoke at first. Outside the fence, the concrete looked ordinary. Arthur remembered kneeling there, gathering tools while rich men laughed. He remembered the mirror sliding through the dust. He remembered Julian stepping over it as if it were nothing. Then he looked back into the hangar, where apprentices were now teaching one another how to inspect the hidden places. Mara asked whether he ever got tired of telling the story. Arthur smiled faintly. He said the story was not about him. It was about the warning. Because every machine, every workplace, every family, every life gives warnings before it breaks. Sometimes those warnings come from screens, sometimes from numbers, sometimes from a sound no one else notices, and sometimes they come from a person the room has already decided not to respect. The danger is not only missing the warning. The danger is deciding who is allowed to give one. Arthur picked up his toolbox and turned from the fence. He walked back into Hangar 12 slowly, with the same worn jacket, the same tired knees, and the same careful hands. But he no longer walked like a man waiting to be removed. He walked like someone the truth had finally brought home. So if you ever see someone being dismissed because they look too old, too poor, too quiet, or too ordinary to matter, remember Arthur Vale. Remember the aircraft that warned them 3 times. Remember the billionaire who laughed. Remember the mirror on the concrete. And remember this: what you step over may be the very thing that could have saved you. Before anyone knew his name, a soaked stranger walked into the restaurant looking like he might not survive another minute.
Do not let him near the tables.
Then his strength faded in the middle of lunch, and the room treated his need like something shameful to avoid. Only Naomi moved toward him, not because she was fearless, but because everyone else had chosen distance.
Somebody call emergency services now.
Naomi saw a human being where everyone else saw trouble, dirt, danger, or an interruption to their lunch.
Please, I'm sorry.
Kendra Blythe did not ask whether the man was breathing. She only saw him as a stain on her restaurant.
Stand up before you make this place look filthy.
Naomi had almost nothing left, but she spent her last money, so the stranger would not reach the hospital hungry.
Compassion is not in your job description. Take off the apron. You are done here. Use the back door. Even let her leave through the front door.
She sent Naomi into the rain like shame belonged to her. The customers who had watched Naomi kneel beside a dying man now watched her lose her job for it. Some looked away. Some looked embarrassed. Some looked relieved that the punishment had not landed on them. Only one person tried to follow her. A busboy named Isaiah, barely 19, took 2 steps forward before Kendra's stare pinned him back in place. He had 2 younger sisters and a mother on disability. Fear did what cruelty always depends on it to do. Naomi left with her apron folded in her hands, her final tip still trapped in Kendra's locked drawer, and rain soaking through her shoes by the time she reached the bus stop. That night, she told her Aunt Lottie only part of the truth. Lottie Reed was 68, though illness had aged her unevenly. Some mornings, she remembered entire hymns from childhood and the smell of Naomi's mother's perfume. Other mornings, she forgot the word for window. A stroke 3 years earlier had weakened her left side, and a slow fog had settled over her memory after that, arriving in patches that came and went without warning. Naomi had moved into the little apartment on Anson Street to care for her after Naomi's mother died of heart failure, because there had been no one else willing and no money for proper help. Naomi had once been on a different path. At 18, she had graduated near the top of her class, with a scholarship letter from a nursing program folded in a Bible on her mother's dresser. Teachers had called her steady. Counselors had called her promising. Her mother had called her the one who would break the cycle. But cycles do not break just because a letter says congratulations. Sometimes they tighten. Sometimes a hospital bill arrives. Sometimes a caregiver is needed more urgently than a dreamer. So Naomi traded lecture halls for double shifts, textbooks for order pads, and a future with clean white shoes for work shoes that pinched until her toes went numb. She did not regret caring for Lottie. Love was not the problem. The problem was that love did not pay rent, did not refill prescriptions, did not stop landlords from taping notices to doors. The problem was that people praised sacrifice from a distance, then punished the person making it for being tired. By dawn, after the longest night of her life, Naomi had calculated everything and found no answer. Without the diner, she had no paycheck. Without the paycheck, she had no rent. Without rent, Lottie could lose the only home she recognized. Naomi had prayed, but even prayer felt like it had to squeeze through a ceiling crowded with other desperate voices. Then the envelope came. It did not arrive in the mail. It did not come with a knock. It slid silently under the door just before sunrise, a pale blue rectangle against the scratched wooden floor. Naomi stared at it for several seconds before standing. Her first thought was that it might be another notice from the landlord. Her second was that she no longer had room in her chest for one more bad thing. The envelope had her name written across the front in dark ink, not printed. Written, Naomi Reed. The letters were careful, almost old-fashioned. There was no return address, only a small embossed mark in the corner, a lantern surrounded by 3 waves. Inside was not money. That almost disappointed her before she could stop herself. Inside was a single card, thick and expensive, with an address on East Bay Street and a request for her presence that morning at 9. Beneath the address was a line that made Naomi sit down before her knees could make the decision for her. It said that her act at the Mariners' table had not gone unseen. That was all. No explanation. No signature she recognized. Just that sentence, sitting in her lap like a match struck in a dark room. Naomi almost threw it away. People in trouble learn caution. Miracles, when they appear too suddenly, often come with hidden hooks. But the address belonged to the old Peabody House, a restored building near the harbor that Naomi knew only from passing it on the bus. It had once been a shipping office. Now, according to the brass plaque she had seen from the sidewalk, it belonged to something called the Lantern Harbor Foundation. She searched the name on her cracked phone. The screen loaded slowly, then showed a website full of polished photographs, food programs, mobile clinics, emergency shelters, legal aid, hurricane relief. The foundation had been started decades earlier by a shipping family that had turned old warehouse money into charity. Its current chair was a woman named Celeste Vane, known in Charleston for giving away money with one hand and guarding her privacy with the other. Naomi did not understand what any of it had to do with her. Still, at 8:30, after making sure Lottie had breakfast and leaving the neighbor with a number to call in case of trouble, Naomi put on her cleanest blouse, brushed lint from her coat, and took the bus toward East Bay Street. She carried the blue envelope in her bag like evidence in a trial no one had explained. The Peabody House looked even larger up close. Its windows were tall and arched, its brick washed clean by rain, its front steps flanked by planters full of white flowers that looked too expensive to touch. Naomi paused at the bottom step, suddenly aware of her shoes, her tired eyes, and the faint smell of diner grease still caught in her hair, no matter how carefully she had washed it. A security guard opened the door before she reached it. He did not ask whether she belonged. He said her name with respect and guided her inside. That unsettled her, more than suspicion would have. The lobby was warm and quiet. Not rich in the loud way of chandeliers and marble meant to impress, but in the deep, quiet way of places built by people who expect the world to move aside. Oil paintings lined the walls. A long table held brochures about flood relief and food access. Near the back, through a set of open doors, Naomi saw a conference room where 3 people stood waiting. One was Celeste Vane. She was in her 70s, silver-haired, straight-backed, and smaller than Naomi expected. Her face held the calm of someone who had survived more than her portrait suggested. Beside her stood a lawyer with a leather folder, and near the window, wrapped in a clean sweater, thinner but alive, was the man from the diner. Naomi stopped breathing for a moment. The man looked different without rainwater dripping from his coat. His beard had been trimmed. His skin still carried the grayness of recovery, but his eyes were clear. He was not polished. He was not suddenly transformed into someone untouched by pain, but he was alive. And when he saw Naomi, the shame in his expression changed into something more fragile and more difficult to bear: gratitude. Celeste Vane did not begin with grand speeches. She explained gently that the man Naomi had helped was named Adrian Vane, her only son. He had not been missing in the way newspapers like to describe missing heirs. His story was messier, more human, and far less convenient for gossip. Years earlier, after the death of his wife and little daughter in a highway accident, Adrian had withdrawn from the world he once helped serve. Grief had taken the shape of silence, then isolation, then a long wandering that no family money could easily fix. He had refused interviews, refused board meetings, refused even the name that tied him to wealth. For months, he had been living between shelters, ferry terminals, and hospital waiting rooms, convinced that the comfort of his family was something he no longer deserved. The foundation had searched for him quietly. Too much publicity could have turned his suffering into entertainment. Too much pressure could have driven him farther away. On the day Naomi found him, Adrian had been trying to reach the foundation office on foot after losing his medication and his wallet during a storm. He had made it only as far as the mariner's table. Every person in that restaurant had seen a problem. Naomi had seen a person. Celeste made sure Naomi understood that this difference had likely saved Adrian's life. The emergency physician had said another hour in the cold rain, with his blood sugar collapsing and his body weakened, might have ended very differently. The meal Naomi paid for had arrived with the paramedics' paperwork and had become the detail that made everyone at the hospital talk, not because of its cost, but because of what it cost Naomi. Naomi felt heat rise behind her eyes. She tried to say that anyone would have done the same, but even as the thought formed, she knew it was not true. Everyone had been there. Everyone had seen him. Most had chosen distance. Celeste then did something Naomi did not expect. She did not offer a reward in the crude way people sometimes pay for conscience, as if kindness were a lost wallet returned for a fee. Instead, she asked Naomi about her life, not with pity, not with the polished curiosity of donors touring poverty for an afternoon. She asked as if Naomi's answers mattered. Naomi did not tell everything at first. Pride has its own survival instinct. But Celeste had spent decades listening to people who were tired of needing help, and she knew how to wait. Slowly, Naomi told her about Lottie, the unpaid rent, the nursing scholarship that had expired, the diner job, and the way Kendra had dismissed her in front of a room full of witnesses. She left out the most humiliating details until Adrian, from beside the window, lowered his head as though each one had landed on him personally. By the end of the meeting, Naomi's life had changed in ways she could not immediately absorb. The Lantern Harbor Foundation offered her a position coordinating a new community meals program called Harbor Hands, which would partner with local restaurants to create emergency meal vouchers for people in crisis. The salary was more than double what she had made at the diner. The benefits included home care support that could help with Lottie's medical needs. The foundation's housing attorney would contact Naomi's landlord that afternoon to stop the eviction and settle the arrears from a hardship fund, not as charity tossed from above, but as stabilization for a caregiver who had been carrying too much alone. Naomi listened with her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles ached. She had expected, at most, a thank you note, perhaps a small check, perhaps nothing she could rely on. She had not expected an opening. She had not expected someone to look at her years of sacrifice and see qualifications instead of weakness. Celeste explained that the foundation did not need someone who merely understood policy. It needed someone who understood hunger without making hungry people feel small. It needed someone who knew the difference between feeding a person and humiliating them. It needed someone who had proven, under pressure, that human dignity mattered even when it was inconvenient. Naomi accepted. But stories like Naomi's do not end the moment good news arrives. In real life, blessings often disturb the people who benefited from your struggle. and Kendra Blythe had built too much of her little kingdom on Naomi, staying silent, poor, and disposable to accept Naomi's rise quietly. At first, Kendra only heard rumors. A delivery driver mentioned that the waitress she had fired had been seen entering the Peabody house. A former customer called the restaurant, asking whether it was true that the woman who helped the collapsed man now worked for the Lantern Harbor Foundation. Isaiah, trying and failing to hide his smile, told another server that Naomi's rent had been handled and her aunt would get medical support. By closing time, Kendra was no longer angry. She was afraid. Fear is different in people who are used to having power. It does not make them humble. It makes them dangerous. Kendra knew things the staff did not. She knew that for nearly 2 years, she had been skimming from the cash drawer in small amounts that looked like counting errors. She knew she had been marking donated community meals as served, then pocketing the reimbursement money when the owner was away. She knew she had refused hungry people at the door while reporting that the restaurant had participated in local relief efforts. She knew the jar labeled "Storm Meal Fund" had been emptied by her hand more than once. Its coins and bills treated as a private bonus for the trouble of pretending to care. She also knew Naomi had noticed irregularities. Naomi had never accused her. Naomi had been too busy surviving, but she had asked questions. She had once wondered why a church group's prepaid meal vouchers were missing from the drawer. She had once found a voided receipt under the printer with Kendra's manager code on it. She had once given a free bowl of gumbo to a veteran after Kendra claimed the voucher program had ended, only for Naomi to discover the next week that the program was still active. At the time, Kendra had dismissed the questions as confusion. Now she saw them as threats. By the next morning, Kendra had created a new story. According to her, Naomi had not been fired for helping a stranger. Naomi had been fired after an internal review suggested she had stolen money from the register and used a medical emergency to distract from it. Kendra did not make the accusation loudly at first. She was too strategic. She let it leak in pieces, through staff whispers, through a carefully worded email to the restaurant owner, through a complaint sent to the Lantern Harbor Foundation's general inbox. The complaint claimed that Naomi Reed was dishonest, unstable, and unfit to handle charitable funds. To make the lie look official, Kendra pressured Isaiah to sign a witness note stating that he had seen Naomi near the drawer before cash went missing. Isaiah refused at first. He said he had seen nothing like that. But Kendra knew his schedule, his family situation, and his fear of losing the only job close enough to home. She cut his hours in half for 1 week, then returned them with a warning hidden behind a smile. By the second week, Isaiah signed a statement he hated himself for signing. Kendra also convinced a prep cook named Marisol to say Naomi had been upset about money. That part was technically true, which made the lie harder to fight. Naomi had been upset about money because poverty had been pressing its knee against her chest for years. Kendra twisted that human truth into motive. When the foundation received the complaint, they did what responsible organizations must do. They placed Naomi on temporary administrative leave while the matter was reviewed. Celeste herself called Naomi and made it clear that leave was not judgment, but process. Still, the word leave felt like a door closing. Naomi had held her new job for only 11 days. The apartment that had begun to feel safe became heavy again. Lottie sensed Naomi's sadness even through the fog of her memory. Some evenings, she reached for Naomi's hand without knowing exactly why. Naomi tried not to cry in front of her. She had cried enough into dishwater, enough into bus windows, enough silently behind the walk-in freezer at the diner. She was tired of tears that changed nothing. What hurt most was not even the risk of losing the job. It was the precision of the lie. Kendra had chosen the accusation that would wound Naomi deepest because Naomi had spent her whole life guarding her integrity. Poor people learned that one mistake can become their whole identity. In the mouths of people looking for reasons to dismiss them, Naomi had always kept receipts, counted change twice, returned overpayments, corrected tips when customers wrote too much by accident. She knew how quickly a black woman in a service uniform could be called dishonest by someone whose own theft wore perfume and a manager badge. For 3 days, Naomi heard nothing. During those 3 days, Kendra enjoyed herself. She moved through the mariner's table with renewed sharpness, telling staff that consequences were finally catching up with people who played saint for attention. She pretended not to care when customers asked about Naomi, then made sure they received a version of events muddy enough to stain her. She even printed a new policy about employee conduct during emergencies, as if compassion had been a workplace hazard. But lies require maintenance. Truth can sit quietly and wait. The first crack came from Isaiah. Guilt can make a room feel too small. Isaiah stopped sleeping. He replayed the moment Naomi knelt beside Adrian, the way she had held his hand without flinching, the way everyone else, including him, had stood back. He replayed the moment Kendra pushed the witness note toward him and reminded him how many people wanted his job. He thought about his sisters, yes, but he also thought about what kind of man he was becoming if fear could make him harm the one person who had always treated him like he mattered. On the 4th morning, Isaiah went to the foundation office before his shift. He arrived shaking harder than Adrian had shaken in the diner, carrying a folded copy of the statement he had signed. He told the foundation's review attorney that it was false. He admitted Kendra had pressured him. He admitted he had never seen Naomi steal anything. He admitted something else too. For months, he had watched Kendra remove cash from the store meal fund jar and replace donation vouchers with blank slips. That confession did not clear Naomi immediately, but it shifted the room. The second crack came from Marisol. She had been quiet for years because she needed work, and because Kendra had a way of making every immigrant employee feel one document away from disaster, whether that was true or not. Marisol had signed nothing, but she had allowed Kendra to use her name in the complaint. When she learned Isaiah had gone to the foundation, she did not want him standing alone. She brought what Kendra had forgotten existed: photographs. Months earlier, Marisol had photographed several prep lists and reimbursement sheets because Kendra kept blaming kitchen staff for missing voucher meals. At the time, Marisol had only wanted proof that the kitchen had prepared what it was told to prepare. But the photos showed a pattern. On days when the restaurant claimed to have served 20 donated meals, the kitchen had prepared 6. On days when reimbursement forms showed full distribution, staff meal logs showed no matching plates. Several forms had Kendra's manager code. Some had Naomi's initials forged badly enough that anyone who knew her handwriting could see the insult. The third crack came from Adrian. Recovery had not made him suddenly powerful in the way people imagine wealth fixes everything. He was still grieving. He still moved carefully through rooms. He still carried guilt like a second spine. But he had one thing Kendra had not counted on: memory sharpened by humiliation. Adrian remembered the man in the navy suit recording him when he fell. He remembered the angle of the phone. He remembered the table. He remembered the woman at the register who had complained about the interruption while filming half the room. The foundation's attorney tracked the video after a younger staff member found a clipped version online, posted without context, under a caption mocking the stranger on the floor. The internet, for all its cruelty, sometimes preserves what liars hope will disappear. The clipped version showed Naomi kneeling. It showed customers backing away. It showed Kendra standing with folded arms. But it did not show the register clearly. The foundation needed more. The restaurant's internal cameras, according to Kendra, had malfunctioned that day. The owner, Mr. Harlan Cho, was told the system had overwritten the footage. That should have ended the matter. It did not. Mr. Cho had inherited the mariner's table from his father, who had opened it after serving as a Navy cook. Harlan was not a cruel man, but he was an absent one. And absence in leadership often becomes permission for someone worse to take over. He had trusted Kendra because she kept the restaurant profitable and problems quiet. He had ignored small complaints because he was tired, overextended, and grieving his own divorce. When the Lantern Harbor Foundation contacted him directly, he expected a misunderstanding. Instead, he discovered that his security system had not failed. Kendra had disabled the local storage, but she had forgotten about the backup connected to the insurance provider after a break-in the previous year. The footage wasn't on the restaurant computer. It was in a secure archive she did not know how to erase. Harlan watched it alone first. He watched Naomi serving tables during the rush. He watched Adrian enter, soaked and unsteady. He watched the room recoil. He watched Naomi kneel while Kendra stood back. He watched Naomi ask for emergency help. He watched her pay at the register with her own debit card, not remove money from it. He watched Kendra take Naomi's apron and send her out the side door. Then Harlan kept watching. The archive held more than that day. It held weeks. It held Kendra opening the donation jar after closing. It held her removing envelopes from the voucher drawer. It held her entering manager codes during cash outs, voiding meals that had been paid for by community partners, and slipping bills into the side pocket of her blazer. It held her handing Isaiah the witness note in the storage hallway, pointing toward the schedule board, and making the threat clear even without audio. The truth had not needed to shout. It had needed someone to look. When Naomi was called back to the foundation office, she expected another question, another form, another polite expression from people deciding whether to believe her. Instead, she found Celeste, Adrian, Harlan Cho, Isaiah, Marisol, and the foundation attorney seated around the same conference table where hope had first begun to feel possible. Naomi stood at the doorway, uncertain whether she had entered a trial or a rescue. Celeste did not make her wait. She explained that the accusations had been withdrawn, disproven, and referred for further action. Harlan apologized, with a face so pale, it seemed the shame had drained him. He admitted that his trust in Kendra had allowed harm to grow under his roof. Isaiah cried before he could finish his apology. Marisol kept her eyes lowered until Naomi crossed the room and touched her shoulder. Not because Naomi owed anyone comfort, but because she understood what fear could do to good people trapped under bad authority. Adrian said the least, but his presence said enough. He had been the man on the floor. Now he was one of the reasons the truth was standing. Naomi was cleared fully. Her leave was ended. Her name was restored. But restoration, for someone who has been publicly humiliated, is not simply a letter saying the matter is closed. A lie travels through people. It enters rooms before you do. It sits in the air, waiting to see whether you will defend yourself or shrink. Celeste understood that. So did Harlan. The Mariners' table held a staff meeting the following Monday before opening. This time, Naomi did not enter through the side door. She entered through the front. The same bell rang above her head, bright and careless, just as it had the day Adrian collapsed. But the room felt different now. The chairs were stacked on tables. The floor smelled of lemon cleaner. The staff stood near the counter, tense and quiet. Kendra was there too, though no longer behind the host stand. Her makeup was perfect, but her face had lost the confidence that once made people step aside. Harlan spoke first, not with the polished language of corporate apologies, but with the rough honesty of a man who had finally looked at what his neglect had cost. He told the staff that Naomi Reed had been wrongfully fired, falsely accused, and publicly mistreated for doing what every decent person in that room should have done. He confirmed that Kendra Blythe had been terminated for cause, and that evidence of theft, intimidation, falsification of records, and charity fraud had been turned over to the proper authorities. Kendra tried to hold herself stiff, as if posture could substitute for innocence. But there are moments when a person's own silence becomes a confession. She had spent years making others feel small under fluorescent lights. Now she stood under the same lights, while the room learned what she had done. The poetic justice was not loud, it was precise. Kendra had fired Naomi for feeding a hungry stranger, and now the theft that destroyed her reputation came from money meant to feed hungry strangers. She had accused Naomi of stealing from a register, and the register logs exposed her. She had used employees' fear to create false statements, and those same employees became the witnesses who helped undo her. She had sent Naomi through the side door in shame, and Naomi returned through the front, while Kendra left, escorted by the owner she had deceived. No one applauded. It was better that way. Applause might have made it feel like a performance. This was not a performance. It was accountability. Kendra's downfall did not end at the sidewalk. Investigators later found that the stolen voucher funds were larger than anyone first believed. Several small churches had paid the Mariners' table in advance to provide hot meals during storms, believing their donations had reached people who needed them. Some had not. A veterans group had sponsored meal cards that were quietly canceled in the system. A neighborhood relief fund had been billed for plates never served. Kendra had not merely stolen cash. She had stolen trust from people who gave what little they had to help others. The charges that followed did not make Naomi happy. She was not the kind of person who found joy in someone else's ruin. But she did feel something steadier than happiness. She felt the weight of a foot lifting from her neck. She felt the world, for once, refusing to ask the wounded person to be the only one who pays. Kendra tried to find another management job, but Charleston is smaller than pride imagines. People talk, records travel, references matter. The same polished confidence that once opened doors now raised questions she could not answer. For the first time in years, Kendra had to live without the protection of a title, and without people beneath her to blame. Naomi returned to the Lantern Harbor Foundation the next day, not as a woman rescued by luck, but as someone beginning the work she had been preparing for her whole life without knowing it. Harbor Hands started small. At first, it was only a list of 5 restaurants willing to keep emergency meal cards behind the counter. The cards were simple, with no public label that could embarrass the person using them. A church, a shelter nurse, a bus driver, or a school counselor could request one. The meal would be served without questions, without a speech, without making hunger prove itself worthy. Naomi insisted on that. Hunger had already humiliated people enough. She built the program from memory as much as training. She remembered the mother counting coins under the table. She remembered the veteran turned away over a missing voucher. She remembered Adrian's hand trembling on a cold tile floor while strangers measured whether he deserved to be touched. She remembered all the people she had served at the Mariners' table who were one bad week away from becoming invisible. Her first major policy was called the warm seat rule. Any participating restaurant that accepted foundation funds had to agree that a person in crisis could sit inside safely while waiting for help, even if they could not order immediately. No one would be forced back into rain because discomfort was bad for business. No one would be treated like a threat for needing warmth. Some restaurant owners resisted. They worried about image, customer complaints, and liability. Naomi listened. Then she told them, calmly and without accusation, that a business afraid of being seen helping hungry people was not actually afraid of liability. It was afraid of being reminded what community means. A surprising number signed after that. The Mariners' table became one of the first official partners. Harlan Cho did more than sign. He changed the restaurant. He installed transparent accounting for every donated meal. He created a staff emergency fund. He hired an outside manager with nonprofit experience. He raised wages modestly but meaningfully, because guilt without structural change is only emotion wearing a better suit. He also placed a small brass plaque near the entrance, not with Naomi's face or a dramatic version of the story, but with a simple line that said every person who entered hungry deserved to leave treated as human. Naomi did not ask for the plaque. At first, she did not even like it. She worried it made her one act of kindness seem exceptional when she believed it should have been ordinary. But Celeste told her that reminders were necessary because decency often disappears not from one grand act of evil, but from 100 small permissions to look away. Adrian slowly returned to himself, though not to the man he had been before tragedy. Some losses do not give back the original version of a person. They make something quieter, deeper, sometimes more compassionate, sometimes more fragile. He began volunteering with Harbor Hands, first behind the scenes, reviewing supply lists and helping design intake forms that did not shame people. Later, he trained with peer support counselors to work with people in grief, addiction recovery, and housing instability. He did not pretend his family name had saved him. In fact, he understood more clearly than anyone that it almost had not. Money had searched for him, but a waitress with $38 had reached him first. That truth changed him. His relationship with Celeste healed slowly. Mother and son had spent years separated by grief, guilt, and all the words each feared would injure the other. Naomi never intruded on that healing. She only noticed, over months, that Adrian stopped standing near exits during meetings. Celeste stopped looking at him as if he might vanish if she blinked. One afternoon, Naomi saw them walk together along the harbor after a fundraiser, not speaking much, simply sharing space. Sometimes that is what forgiveness looks like before it has language. At home, life changed too. The foundation helped Naomi and Lottie move from the drafty apartment on Anson Street into a small but bright unit near a park, with an elevator, reliable heat, and a window where Lottie could watch children chasing pigeons in the afternoon. The first night there, Lottie became agitated because the walls did not feel familiar. Naomi sat with her until the fear passed, describing each room softly, grounding her in the names of things. The next morning, Lottie woke and said the sunlight looked kind. Naomi cried in the kitchen where no one could see. For years, she had measured success in avoided disasters. Rent not late enough to evict, medicine not empty enough to panic, electricity not shut off yet, shoes not broken beyond repair. Now she had space to imagine a life not built entirely around emergencies. She enrolled in evening courses toward a community health certification, not because she needed a title to prove her worth, but because the dream she had buried at 18 still had roots. The scholarship letter from long ago remained in her Bible, creased and yellowing. She did not look at it with grief anymore. She looked at it like evidence that the girl she had been was still somewhere inside the woman she had become, not lost, only waiting. Months passed, and Harbor Hands grew. What began with 5 restaurants became 15, then 28. A mobile meal van joined the program after hurricane season, exposed neighborhoods where older residents could not reach distribution sites. School counselors started calling when students came to class, hungry after weekends. Hospital social workers requested meal cards for discharged patients who had nowhere stable to go. Bus drivers carried small information cards because they were often the first to see who was sleeping where the city pretended not to look. Naomi worked harder than she ever had at the diner, but the work no longer shrank her. There is a difference between exhaustion that empties you and exhaustion that has meaning. She still had difficult days. She still dealt with budgets, skeptical donors, broken supply chains, and people who assumed compassion could be scheduled neatly between office hours. But she also saw men who had been ignored sit down to hot stew without being watched like criminals. She saw mothers receive grocery boxes before shame could force them to choose between pride and dinner. She saw restaurant workers begin to understand that dignity was not extra service, it was the meal. The story of Naomi's firing eventually reached local news, though Celeste did everything possible to keep it from turning into spectacle. Reporters wanted a clean headline: "Poor waitress saves rich heir. Villain manager exposed. Charity triumphs." But life is rarely that clean. Naomi agreed to one interview only after insisting that the focus remain on food insecurity and worker vulnerability, not on turning her into a saint. She was not a saint. She was a woman who had been tired, broke, and scared, and had still chosen to kneel. That distinction mattered. Saints are easy to admire because people imagine they are different from the rest of us. A tired woman choosing mercy with overdue bills in her pocket is much harder to ignore because she removes the excuse that kindness belongs only to people with spare time, spare money, or spotless lives. The interview aired on a Sunday evening. Naomi watched it with Lottie, who understood pieces of it. At one point, Lottie touched the screen when Naomi appeared, then looked at the real Naomi sitting beside her and smiled with sudden recognition. For one clear moment, the fog lifted enough for pride to pass through. Lottie remembered Naomi's mother then. She remembered the hospital. She remembered the little girl who used to line up dolls and pretend to check their temperatures. She remembered enough to tell Naomi, in her own wandering way, that her mother would have been proud. Naomi held that sentence for days. But the most important moment in Naomi's new life did not happen on television. It happened almost 1 year after the firing, on another rainy Tuesday afternoon, at the reopened Mariners table. The restaurant was hosting the launch of an expanded Harbor Hands partnership. There were donors, city officials, restaurant workers, shelter coordinators, and a few regular customers who remembered the old days with uncomfortable clarity. The event could have become polished and empty, the kind of gathering where people discuss hunger over catered trays. Naomi refused to let that happen. Instead of speeches first, she asked everyone to sit for a meal served family style. No VIP table, no reserved corner for donors, no separation between people with checks and people with lived experience. Adrian helped serve. Harlan cleared plates. Celeste sat beside a former shelter resident who now worked as a peer navigator. The room, once divided by fear and judgment, felt almost unfamiliar in its warmth. Near the end, Naomi stood where Kendra had once fired her. She did not describe Kendra with hatred. She did not need to. Hatred would have made Kendra too central to a story that had grown beyond her. Naomi spoke instead about the floor, the actual floor of the restaurant, the tile near table 6 where Adrian had collapsed. She said that every community has a floor like that, a place where someone falls and everyone else must decide what kind of person they are. Some step back, some record, some complain about the inconvenience, and sometimes one person kneels, not because they are fearless, but because they know what it feels like to need someone. She explained that Harbor Hands existed to make kneeling less lonely. It existed so mercy would not depend on one waitress risking her job or one stranger being connected to a powerful family. It existed because people should not have to be secretly important to be treated as worth saving. That line stayed with everyone. People should not have to be secretly important to be treated as worth saving. Adrian lowered his eyes when she said it. Celeste reached for his hand. Harlan looked toward the doorway, perhaps remembering all the people his restaurant had once allowed to be turned away. Isaiah, now promoted and studying hospitality management with foundation support, wiped his face quickly and pretended he had not. Marisol smiled openly, no longer afraid of being seen. After the event, when the room had emptied and rain softened the windows, Naomi stood for a moment by table 6. The tile had been repaired, where a crack once ran through it. Most people would never know anything had happened there. That seemed right to her. Sacred places do not always announce themselves. Sometimes they hide under ordinary tables in ordinary diners, waiting for ordinary people to make choices that echo farther than they can see. Naomi thought about the blue envelope that had slid under her door before dawn. For a long time, she had believed that envelope was the beginning of her rescue. Now she understood it differently. The rescue had begun earlier, on the floor, when she refused to let the room decide a man's value for her. The envelope had only carried the news that kindness, though delayed, had found its way back. And yet, she also knew kindness did not always return with a foundation job, a new apartment, or public vindication. Sometimes kindness returns quietly. Sometimes it returns years later, through a child who remembers being fed. Sometimes it returns only as the knowledge that you did not become cruel when cruelty would have been easier. That kind of return is harder to measure, but it is real. Naomi kept the blue envelope. She framed it in her office, not because of the address or the embossed lantern, but because of the sentence inside. Her act had not gone unseen. On difficult days, when funding was short or the need felt endless, she looked at that sentence and thought of all the unseen acts happening across the city. A cashier slipping a sandwich into a bag, a bus driver waiting an extra minute for an elderly passenger, a teacher sending food home without making a child explain. A nurse warming a blanket for someone no family had come to visit. A neighbor knocking on a door before the silence became permanent. The world is held together by people who do small mercies without witnesses. But Naomi also learned that mercy must become more than a moment. It must become policy. It must become systems. It must become wages, shelters, meal programs, honest records, and leaders who do not leave vulnerable workers at the mercy of petty tyrants. One good person can save a life. A good community can stop that life from falling so far in the first place. Years later, when people asked Naomi why she helped Adrian that day, they expected a dramatic answer. They expected her to say she sensed he was important, or that fate whispered to her, or that she had some grand vision of what would follow. She always disappointed them gently. She explained that she had no idea who he was. She did not see a foundation heir, a lost son, or a future partner in a citywide program. She saw a man on the floor. That was enough. And maybe that is the part of the story worth carrying with us. Not the envelope, not the money, not the downfall of a cruel manager, satisfying as justice may be. The heart of the story is the moment before reward exists, before witnesses understand, before the world claps, before anyone promises that goodness will be repaid. It is the moment when helping costs something. Naomi lost her job in that moment. She spent the last of her money in that moment. She was humiliated in that moment, but she kept something Kendra could never steal, even with false statements and forged records. She kept the kind of dignity that does not depend on a title. She kept the kind of courage that survives poverty, grief, and exhaustion. She kept the part of herself that still believed a stranger's life was worth bending down for. Kendra, in the end, lost everything she had tried to protect by refusing to bend. She protected the restaurant's image and destroyed her own. She guarded the cash drawer and exposed her theft. She treated compassion as weakness and discovered too late that compassion had witnesses stronger than fear. That is how justice sometimes works. Not always quickly, not always loudly, but with a patience that follows every hidden thing to its door. So the next time you see someone fall, maybe not on a restaurant floor, maybe not in a way anyone else can see, remember Naomi Reed. Remember the room that stepped back. Remember the woman who knelt. Remember that a person does not become worthy of kindness because they are secretly rich, secretly connected, or secretly important. They are worthy because they are human. And if you believe the world still needs people who choose mercy when no one is clapping, carry that belief into the next ordinary moment. Because somewhere, in a diner, on a bus, in a hospital hallway, under a leaking roof, someone is waiting to find out whether the room will turn away or whether one person will remember what humanity is supposed to look like. The storm was loud enough to bury most sounds in Riverton that night, but Caleb Henderson still heard the motorcycle before it reached his shop.
The engine is screaming for help.
He heard the engine screaming through the rain, fighting for one more mile through Riverton's empty industrial streets.
Come on, just one more mile.
A violent metallic knock cut through the wind
Not now.
and turned Malik's last mile into a fight for control. The bike slid into the flooded lot outside Henderson Motor Works, dragged sideways by rain, failing metal, and fading control. The rider fell hard near the old garage door, soaked to the bone and clutching his shoulder beside the ruined Harley.
Sir, can you make it run long enough to get me home?
Before Caleb understood why Malik was riding through the storm, he learned Malik had promised his daughter he would be at her graduation by morning.
My daughter is waiting for me.
Malik had no money, no backup plan, and no time left to lose. All he had was a father's promise waiting at the end of the road. Caleb opened the ruined Harley with the careful hands of a man who had spent his life listening to machines. Caleb listened to the broken engine for only a few seconds and felt 18 years of buried pain rise inside him.
I know that sound.
The failure was not ordinary wear. It carried the same deliberate pattern Caleb had feared for 18 years.
I've seen this before.
The sound inside Malik's Harley had already destroyed Caleb's life once, long before this storm brought it back to his door.
What did this bike do to you?
Because that sound had already destroyed his life once. For several seconds, neither man spoke as rain tapped steadily against the garage roof.
Don't touch a thing.
For several seconds, neither man spoke. Malik stood near the workbench, staring at the old title papers, as if the ink might rearrange itself into something easier to understand. Caleb remained beside the exposed engine, one hand resting against the cold metal of the Road King. The storm had begun to move beyond Riverton by then, but rain still tapped steadily against the roof, slipping through a crack near the back wall and falling into an empty oil pan with a slow, hollow rhythm. Malik had spent most of his adult life around motorcycles. He knew enough to recognize when a mechanic was concerned and when a mechanic was simply trying to sound important. But what he saw on Caleb's face was neither. It was grief mixed with recognition, the look of a man who had just found a piece of his own past hidden inside a stranger's machine. He asked Caleb what the name on the paperwork meant. The old mechanic did not answer immediately. He picked up the damaged cam component again and turned it beneath the fluorescent light. Its edges were worn down, but the seal was still there. Small, faint, nearly invisible unless someone knew where to look. Then Caleb told Malik that the rider listed on those documents had died in the accident that ruined him. Not the man who bought the bike years later. Not the rider who had owned it before Malik. The original rider. The man whose crash had been used to blame Caleb for a failure he had tried to prevent. Malik looked back at the Road King. Suddenly, the motorcycle no longer seemed like an unlucky purchase from a liquidation yard. It looked like evidence that had somehow survived 18 years of lies. Caleb explained that the official report had claimed the motorcycle had been destroyed after the crash. That detail had always bothered him, though he had never been able to prove why. The bike had been taken away before he could inspect it. The police had refused to let him near the evidence. Victor's lawyers had moved quickly, and every question Caleb asked had been treated as the bitter complaint of a man trying to escape responsibility. By the time Caleb understood how completely he had been trapped, the machine was gone. Or so he had believed. Malik asked the question that had been hanging in the garage since the moment Caleb saw the title. If the bike was supposed to be destroyed, how had it ended up in his hands? Caleb had no answer, but he knew one thing with certainty. Machines did not disappear on their own. Someone had moved that Harley. Someone had rebuilt it. Someone had removed parts, replaced evidence, erased records, and then sent it back into the world under a different history. And if the same kind of damaged component had caused the previous owner's highway crash, then Victor Hale's secret had not ended 18 years earlier. It had continued. That realization changed the repair. Until then, Caleb had been trying to save Malik's ride so a father could keep a promise to his daughter. But now every part that came off the engine mattered for another reason. The damaged chain, the worn guide, the altered tensioner, the hidden Hale seal. None of it could be thrown away. Caleb laid each piece on a clean cloth, carefully separating them from the normal debris of the repair. He took photographs with an old digital camera from a drawer beneath the counter. The camera was outdated, its screen scratched, but it still worked. He photographed the seals, the manufacturing numbers, the strange cuts in the metal, and the repair marks that had been hidden under layers of grease. Malik watched quietly for a while. Then he asked whether this could get Caleb into trouble. The old mechanic gave a tired half-smile. Trouble, he said, had been living with him for 18 years. He just had not known its name. That was the first time Malik saw something change in Caleb. Before that night, the older man had carried himself like someone trying not to take up space in the world. He moved carefully. He spoke softly. He avoided eye contact too long. But now, while studying the engine, Caleb's hands became steadier. His back straightened. The old instinct returned to him. the instinct of a mechanic who trusted what he knew, even when nobody else believed him. He began explaining the failure in a way Malik could understand. The chain tensioner had not simply worn down. It had been weakened by design. The materials were cheap, but the failure pattern was too consistent to be accidental. The part had been made to look almost identical to a reliable one, yet it lacked the strength required for long-distance riding. It would survive just long enough to pass inspection. It would survive long enough for a customer to drive away feeling satisfied. Then, under heat and pressure, it would begin to fail. A rider might hear a faint metallic tapping first, then a vibration. Then, if they ignored it or could not reach help in time, the engine could lock. Caleb's voice became quieter as he described the last part. An engine lock at highway speed could turn a motorcycle into a weapon against the person riding it. Malik looked down at the wet leather gloves in his hands. He had been less than an hour from that kind of disaster when he reached Henderson Motor Works. For the first time, he understood that Caleb had not just repaired his bike. The old man may have saved his life. But Caleb did not want gratitude. He seemed almost uncomfortable when Malik tried to thank him. Instead, he returned to the engine and kept working. Every few minutes, he would pause, listen, adjust something, and continue. There was no rush in his movements, yet there was urgency in everything he did. The clock above the office door passed 2 in the morning, then 3. By 4, the rain had weakened into a mist, and the distant thunder had faded beyond the warehouses at the edge of town. The city outside had gone quiet. Only the occasional sound of tires on wet pavement passed through the darkness. Inside the garage, Caleb installed the camshaft he had kept hidden for so many years. He did not make a ceremony of it. He did not tell Malik how much it had cost him to use it. He simply cleaned the part one final time, fitted it into place, and tightened each bolt with the kind of attention that comes from experience and regret. But Malik understood. He had seen the way Caleb held that camshaft before putting it into the engine. It was not like a mechanic holding a spare part. It was like a father holding the last object connected to a life he had failed to protect. Malik offered to pay for it. Caleb refused. Malik offered to sell the Road King once he reached Fairmont, to send the money back, to do whatever it took. Again, Caleb refused. Then, after a long silence, the old man told him something that did not sound like an order. It sounded more like a request from someone who had spent too many years alone. He asked Malik to come back after the graduation. No matter what happened, no matter how tired he was, no matter whether the day went well or badly. Just come back. Malik nodded. He had no idea why that promise mattered so much, but he knew it did. And after hearing what Caleb had lost, he could not bring himself to take the request lightly. A little before dawn, the Road King came back to life. The engine did not roar wildly. It settled into a deep, steady rhythm, low and strong, like a heartbeat returning after a long illness. Caleb listened with his head slightly tilted, eyes closed, letting the sound fill the garage. For a moment, Malik thought the old mechanic might cry, but Caleb only opened his eyes and gave a single nod. The bike was ready. Malik stood beside it in the gray light of early morning, looking down at the man who had worked through a storm for someone he had never met. He wanted to say something meaningful, something big enough to match what had been done for him. But there are moments when words feel too small. So he simply told Caleb that he would not forget. Caleb looked toward the old framed photograph in the office. Then he looked back at Malik. He told him that forgetting was easy. Keeping a promise was harder. Malik rode out of Riverton as the first thin line of sunlight touched the clouds. The streets were still wet. The warehouses were still dark. But the Road King moved smoothly beneath him, carrying him toward Fairmont, toward his daughter, toward the promise he had nearly lost. Caleb remained at the garage door long after the sound of the motorcycle disappeared. Then he turned back inside. The broken parts were still laid out on the cloth. The old title papers were still open on the workbench. The hail seal sat beneath the yellow light like a small wound that had finally started bleeding again. Caleb picked up the burned spark plug he had kept from Isaiah's accident. For 18 years, he had treated it like proof of his failure. He had hidden it in a drawer, taken it out only when grief became too heavy, then put it away again before morning. But that day, he did not return it to the drawer. He placed it beside the damaged component from Malik's motorcycle. Old evidence beside new evidence. A dead sun beside a living truth. By 8 o'clock, Riverton was awake. And by 9, Victor Hale was standing outside Henderson Motor Works with 2 investors, a polished black SUV, and the kind of smile that had fooled people for most of his life. Victor had aged well on the surface. His hair was silver now, but styled carefully. His jacket looked expensive. His watch caught the morning light. He carried himself with the confidence of a man who believed the world had already decided he was important. Behind him, across the street, banners were being hung on a vacant lot. The banners displayed the logo of Hale Performance Customs and announced the opening of a new luxury performance center. It was bigger than Victor's original garage had ever been. Glass walls, chrome signage, a showroom for wealthy riders who wanted their machines to look dangerous without ever having to understand what was inside them. Caleb watched from the doorway as Victor approached. The investors stayed a few steps behind, pretending to admire the old shop while clearly seeing it as nothing more than a piece of land in the way. Victor greeted Caleb with the practiced warmth of a man who enjoyed being cruel only when no one could prove it. He spoke about progress, about opportunity, about how Riverton was changing. Then he handed Caleb a folder containing the final notice from the bank. 7 days. That was all Caleb had left before the property would be transferred. Victor acted as though he was doing him a favor by delivering the news personally. He suggested that perhaps it was time for Caleb to stop fighting old ghosts. He suggested that a man his age deserved peace. Caleb did not react. He did not argue. He did not raise his voice. He simply walked back to the workbench and picked up the damaged component from Malik's bike. Then he placed it on the counter between them. Victor's expression changed, only for a second. But Caleb saw it. The smile remained, yet something behind it slipped. His eyes moved to the Hale seal stamped into the metal. His fingers tightened around the folder. The smooth confidence in his face became strained, like a thin layer of paint cracking over rust. Victor recovered quickly. He said the seal meant nothing. He claimed parts changed hands all the time. He suggested Caleb was seeing conspiracies because he could not accept the past. But when Victor turned to leave, Caleb noticed something else. His hand was trembling. Not much, just enough. And for the first time in 18 years, Caleb Henderson understood that Victor Hale was afraid. Victor Hale left Henderson Motor Works with the same polished smile he had arrived with, but Caleb knew that smile had changed. It no longer belonged to a man who felt untouchable. It belonged to a man who had just seen a ghost rise from the floorboards of his own past. For the rest of that day, Caleb did not open the shop to customers. He locked the front door, pulled down the faded blinds, and spread every piece of evidence across the workbench. Malik's damaged parts sat beside the burned spark plug from Isaiah's accident. The title papers remained open near Caleb's camera. The old evidence seemed almost impossible to connect at first. One motorcycle from 18 years ago, one bike that should have been destroyed, one seal hidden inside a part no ordinary rider would ever inspect. But Caleb had spent his life listening to engines. He knew that machines told the truth slowly. They did not care who owned the building, who signed the checks, or who had the better lawyer. Metal remembered pressure. Bearings remembered heat. Chains remembered strain. And when something failed by design, the evidence often stayed buried inside the damage. By noon, Caleb had photographed every detail twice. He wrote down serial numbers. He matched worn patterns. He checked the old manuals he had kept in a cabinet near the back wall. Then he found something he had not expected. The part inside Malik's road. King carried a batch number that had been discontinued years earlier. It was from the same supplier Victor had used before the old accident. The same supplier Caleb had warned him about. The same supplier Victor had once claimed had never existed. For nearly 2 hours, Caleb sat alone in the office, staring at that number. He could still hear Isaiah's voice in his mind, not the voice from the night he died. Caleb had tried for years not to remember that night. What stayed with him was an earlier memory. Isaiah standing beside him at the old shop, grease on his hands, laughing at the way his father could recognize a bad engine by sound alone. Isaiah had once told him that engines were honest because they could not lie about pain. If something was wrong inside them, they would always make a noise eventually. Caleb had not understood then how much those words would haunt him. Now they felt like a warning. By late afternoon, Malik called. He had made it to Fairmont. For a moment, Caleb did not answer. He stared at the phone, still unsure whether the call would bring relief or more trouble. Then he picked up. Malik's voice was tired, but it carried something Caleb had not heard in years. Joy. He had arrived just before the ceremony began. He had walked into the school auditorium with rain still drying on his jacket and road dust on his boots. His daughter had been seated among the graduates, wearing the dress he had carried through the storm. When she saw him, she did not run to him. She did not make a scene. She simply looked over the crowd, found him standing near the back wall, and smiled in a way that made every mile worth it. Malik told Caleb that he had never felt so ashamed of how close he came to breaking that promise. Then he told him that his daughter had hugged him afterward and said she knew he would come. That was all Caleb needed to hear. For the first time in 18 years, he felt that maybe one promise had been saved from the same fate as all the others. But Malik had not forgotten what happened at the shop. He had spent part of the afternoon searching through the paperwork for his Road King. The more he looked, the stranger it became. The title history had gaps. The previous owner had purchased the bike through a dealer that no longer existed. The dealer's address turned out to belong to a storage company connected to Hale Performance Customs, and the insurance report from the old owner's death mentioned a mechanical failure but did not list the exact cause. That detail bothered Malik. He called one of the men from Road Saints MC, an older biker named Curtis Bell. Curtis had spent more than 20 years as a state traffic investigator before retirement. He knew how evidence disappeared when powerful people wanted it gone. He also knew how often old files were marked closed long before the truth was fully understood. Malik told him everything. At first, Curtis was cautious. He had seen too many people mistake grief for proof. But when Malik mentioned the Hale seal and the batch number, Curtis became quiet. Then he told Malik that he had heard rumors years ago about Hale Performance Customs. Rumors of cheap parts, suspicious accidents, customers pressured into silence, and repair records that never quite matched the machines on the road. Nothing had ever been proven. Not because there was no truth, because no one had managed to hold enough of it at once. Malik told Curtis he had found a man who might have been carrying part of that truth for 18 years. 3 days later, Malik returned to Riverton. He did not come alone. By then, Caleb had almost convinced himself that Malik would not return. He had spent the days preparing for the bank's deadline, sorting tools into boxes, deciding which machines he could sell, which photographs he could not bear to throw away, and which memories he would have to leave behind if Henderson Motor Works closed forever. He had also started to notice cars slowing near the shop. A black sedan passed twice one afternoon. A dark pickup sat across the street for nearly an hour. Nothing happened. No threats, no broken windows, no warning left on the door. But Caleb understood the message. Victor was watching. On the fourth morning after the storm, the sound of motorcycles rolled down the street. Not one bike, several. The sound was deep and steady, echoing through Riverton's old warehouse district. Caleb stepped outside and saw Malik leading a line of riders into the parking lot. Behind him were members of Road Saints MC, all of them dressed in worn leather and rain-faded denim. They did not arrive like men looking for trouble. They arrived like people who had already decided that someone had been left alone for too long. Curtis Bell was among them. He was tall, gray-haired, and walked with the stiff posture of a man whose old injuries had never fully healed. Beside him stood another biker Caleb recognized after a long moment. The man's name was Raymond Knox, a retired Harley mechanic who had once worked at a supplier near Hale's original garage. Raymond looked older than Caleb remembered. His face had deep lines, and his hands shook slightly as he removed his gloves. But his eyes were clear. He told Caleb he had been at Hale Performance Customs on the night of the accident. Caleb did not speak. Raymond explained that he had delivered a crate of parts that evening. He had seen Victor argue with Caleb near the service bay. He had heard Caleb warn him that the cam system was dangerous. He had heard Victor say the bike was leaving that night, no matter what Caleb thought. Then, after the crash, Raymond saw Victor pull paperwork from an office drawer before the police arrived. He watched him hand documents to a lawyer. He watched him tell everyone that Caleb had approved the work. Raymond had wanted to say something then, but Victor had threatened him. Not openly. Not in a way that could be reported. Victor had simply made it clear that Raymond's job, his reputation, and his family's security could disappear if he caused trouble. Raymond had been younger then. His wife was sick. His son had just started college. He convinced himself that someone else would speak up. No one did. For 18 years, he had carried that cowardice. When Malik told him about Caleb repairing the Road King through the storm, using his own last valuable part to help a stranger keep a promise to his daughter, Raymond said something inside him changed. He realized Caleb had spent 18 years paying for a sin that belonged to another man. And Raymond had spent 18 years helping that lie survive. Curtis placed a thick folder on Caleb's workbench. Inside were copies of old reports, insurance records, auction documents, and storage transfers. It took hours to piece together the full story, but the pattern became impossible to ignore. The motorcycle from the original accident had not been destroyed. It had been moved from the evidence yard under a false disposal order. A shell company had purchased it. The shell company was linked through a chain of ownership to Hale Performance Customs. The bike was rebuilt using replacement parts, then sold through another intermediary to avoid attention. Years later, it reappeared in the hands of the man whose name Malik had found on the title. That man died in a highway accident after his engine locked. The Road King was later sold again through an estate liquidation. And eventually, by chance or fate, it made its way to Malik. The machine had carried the same secret through several owners, leaving wreckage behind it like a trail no one had bothered to follow. Caleb sat down slowly. He had spent years believing the past was over because everyone else had moved on. But the truth was worse. Victor had not simply destroyed Caleb's life and walked away. He had taken the same dangerous system, the same dishonest parts, the same method of hiding evidence, and turned it into a business model. The old accident was not one tragedy. It was the first warning. Curtis told Caleb they needed independent engineers. They needed the damaged parts examined by people with no connection to Hale. They needed the old case reopened. They needed journalists willing to listen. And they needed to move before Victor had time to erase anything else. Caleb listened, but fear still lived inside him. He had been here before. He had brought concerns to people in authority. He had trusted that facts would matter. He had watched Victor walk away while his own name was dragged through the mud. Malik understood that fear, so he did not pressure Caleb. He simply told him that some men spend their whole lives waiting for the right moment to become brave, only to learn that bravery usually begins when someone else is already in danger. That sentence stayed with Caleb. The next morning, Victor Hale announced the grand opening of his newest performance center. It was scheduled for Saturday afternoon, directly across from Henderson Motor Works. The timing was not accidental. Victor wanted cameras, investors, local officials, and reporters to see his polished new showroom, while Caleb's fading garage stood behind it like a symbol of failure. He wanted Riverton to believe that the future belonged to him, and that men like Caleb were nothing more than rusted pieces of the past. The invitation described Hale Performance Customs as a company built on safety, craftsmanship, and loyalty. When Caleb read those words, he almost laughed. Instead, he folded the paper and placed it beside Isaiah's burned spark plug. By Saturday, the street outside Henderson Motor Works looked nothing like it had during the storm. The skies were clear. The sidewalks had been washed clean. White tents stood outside Victor's new building. Caterers moved between tables. Large banners carried the Hale logo. Investors in tailored jackets gathered near the entrance, speaking about growth, property values, and expansion. Victor stood near the stage in front of the showroom doors, smiling for photographs. For years, he had mastered the art of looking like a man who had earned everything. Across the street, Caleb's old sign hung crooked above the garage. Henderson Motor Works. The letters were faded. The roof still leaked. The windows still needed paint. But that morning, the shop was not empty. Inside, Curtis reviewed the evidence one final time. Raymond sat near the office door, pale but determined. Malik stood beside the Road King, now fully repaired. His daughter's graduation flower still tucked into a side compartment. Several members of Road Saints MC waited outside, engines quiet, helmets in hand. Caleb stood near the workbench. In front of him was a small metal box. Inside were the damaged Hale parts, the old spark plug, photographs, records, and copies of every document that could prove what Victor had done. His hands were trembling, not because he doubted the evidence, because he knew that once he stepped outside, there would be no going back. For 18 years, Victor Hale had controlled the story. He had told Riverton who Caleb was. He had told the police what happened. He had told the newspapers who was responsible. And Caleb had lived inside that lie because he had no power to break it. But now, standing in the quiet shop with Malik, Curtis, Raymond, and the road saints behind him, Caleb realized something he had forgotten. Truth did not need to be loud to be strong. It only needed enough people willing to stop looking away. At noon, Victor stepped onto the stage. He began with the same speech he had given at other openings. He spoke about American craftsmanship. He praised the spirit of the open road. He thanked the investors who believed in his vision. He spoke about trust, safety, and the brotherhood of riders. Then the sound of motorcycles filled the street. One by one, the road saints rode into view. More than 30 Harleys moved down the block in a slow line, their engines low and controlled. They did not rev aggressively. They did not block traffic recklessly. They did not shout. They simply arrived. The crowd turned. Victor's smile stiffened. Malik led the group on the blue-black Road King that Caleb had repaired in the storm. He parked directly across from the stage. Behind him, the other riders formed a straight row along the curb. Then Caleb stepped out of Henderson Motor Works. He wore the same faded work shirt he had worn for years. His hands were still stained with oil. His shoulders were slightly bent with age. But he did not look small. He carried the metal box under one arm. Curtis walked beside him holding the records. Raymond followed behind, moving slowly but refusing to stop. The local reporter who had come to cover Victor's opening recognized Caleb almost immediately. She remembered the old accident. She remembered the headlines from 18 years ago. She also remembered that Caleb had disappeared from public life after Isaiah died. When she asked what was happening, Curtis handed her a copy of the evidence summary. The mood changed quickly. Victor tried to interrupt. He told everyone that Caleb was confused. He suggested that the old mechanic was bitter and unstable. He said the road saints were trying to sabotage a legitimate business. But his voice no longer carried the same confidence. Too many people were watching. And this time, Caleb was not alone. Curtis explained the chain of evidence, the false disposal order, the shell company, the rebuilt motorcycle, the repeat failure pattern, the supplier records, the mismatched parts, the mechanics analysis, the old accident report that never mentioned the batch number. Raymond then spoke. His voice shook at first, but it grew steadier with every sentence. He told the crowd that Caleb had warned Victor. He confirmed that Victor had pushed the unsafe bike out of the shop. He described the paperwork being changed before investigators arrived. He admitted that he had stayed silent because he was afraid. He said he had been ashamed of that silence every day since. The crowd did not move. Victor looked toward the investors, hoping they would dismiss it all as drama. But they had stopped smiling. One of them was already on the phone. Another stared at the Hale banner above the showroom entrance as if it had become something ugly. Then Caleb opened the metal box. He removed the burned spark plug. For a moment, the entire street seemed to grow quieter. Caleb told them it came from the motorcycle involved in the crash 18 years earlier. He explained that he had kept it because he believed it represented his failure. But after studying Malik's Road King, he understood that the machine had been failing long before Isaiah died. He held up the damaged Hale component. Then he looked directly at Victor. Caleb did not scream. He did not curse. He did not beg anyone to believe him. He simply told Victor that he had taken his name, his work, and his son. But he had never understood the machines he sold. That was the moment Victor finally lost control. He accused Caleb of lying. He called Raymond a coward and Curtis a washed-up investigator. He claimed Malik had planted evidence. He insisted that the old accident had been closed for years and that no one could reopen it. But panic made him careless. The reporter asked why he knew the old case had been listed as destroyed if he had never seen the disposal order. Victor froze. It was only a brief pause, but it was enough. Curtis had already contacted the State Fraud Division. The reporter had already sent copies of the documents to her editor. Independent engineers had reviewed Caleb's photographs and confirmed that the part failures were consistent with deliberate use of substandard materials. Within an hour, law enforcement officers arrived. They did not arrest Victor immediately in front of everyone. First, they secured the damaged motorcycle parts. They collected the records. They questioned Raymond. They requested access to Hale Performance Customs files, supplier contracts, repair logs, and storage records. But Victor understood what was happening. The story he had buried for 18 years was no longer buried. By evening, the grand opening had been canceled. The investors withdrew. The showroom doors remained closed. And the Hale banners, once meant to celebrate Victor's success, hung over an empty parking lot like reminders of a lie too large to hide. The investigation lasted months. During that time, more writers came forward. A widow from another county brought records from her husband's crash. A former employee described being told to replace expensive parts with cheaper ones. A supplier admitted that Hale had purchased batches of components that failed safety standards, but cost almost half as much. The evidence grew. So did the truth. Victor Hale was eventually charged with fraud, evidence tampering, falsifying repair records, and reckless endangerment connected to multiple motorcycle failures. Civil lawsuits followed. His business collapsed. The same reputation he had built by stealing Caleb's work became the thing that destroyed him. And the most painful part for Victor was that he could not blame anyone else. Every false signature, every altered record, every unsafe part, every rider placed at risk. All of it led back to him. Meanwhile, Riverton began to see Caleb differently. At first, people came to Henderson Motor Works out of curiosity. They wanted to see the mechanic from the news. They wanted to ask questions about the old case. Some came with apologies they should have offered years earlier. Caleb accepted some. Others he could not. Forgiveness, he learned, was not the same as pretending nothing happened. What mattered most was that Isaiah's name was cleared. The revised investigation confirmed that Isaiah had not caused the tragedy. He had tried to save others when the fire broke out. The city recognized him for his courage. A small memorial was placed near the site of the old accident, not as a monument to loss, but as proof that he had been brave when others were afraid. Caleb attended the dedication quietly. He did not give a speech. He stood beneath Isaiah's name and placed the burned spark plug at the base of the memorial for a few seconds before taking it back. This time, he did not see it as evidence of failure. He saw it as the beginning of the truth. Road Saints, MC, started a fundraiser to help Caleb keep his shop. He resisted at first. He did not want charity. He had spent too long believing that accepting help meant admitting weakness. But Malik reminded him that loyalty was not charity. Loyalty meant showing up when someone had spent years showing up for others. The money was enough to pay the bank, repair the roof, replace the failing electrical system, and repaint the front of Henderson Motor Works. Caleb refused to turn the place into something fancy. He did not want glass walls or polished chrome floors. He wanted the shop to remain what it had always been, a place where honest work mattered more than appearances. A few weeks later, a new sign went up above the garage. Henderson Motor Works, built with truth, kept alive by loyalty. Malik came by every weekend after that. Sometimes he needed a repair. Sometimes he did not. Sometimes he simply sat on an old stool near the workbench while Caleb worked and talked about his daughter's new plans after graduation. She visited once too. She brought Caleb a framed photograph from the ceremony. In it, Malik stood in the back of the auditorium, soaked jacket, tired eyes, and a smile so wide it looked almost painful. She told Caleb that her father had made a promise and kept it. Caleb looked at the picture for a long time. Then he told her that promises were not always about being perfect. Sometimes they were about refusing to stop trying, even when the road was dark, the weather was cruel, and every reason to turn back was waiting behind you. Years earlier, Caleb had lost his son because he believed work had to come before everything else. That night in the storm, he chose differently. He chose to save a stranger's promise. And in doing so, he found the truth that finally brought his own son home. Because sometimes, the person who arrives at your door needing help is not there by accident. Sometimes they carry the missing piece of a story you thought was over. Sometimes the smallest act of kindness becomes the force that pulls years of darkness into the light. And sometimes, justice does not arrive like thunder. Sometimes, it comes quietly, in the sound of an old engine finally running the way it was always meant to run. If you believe that truth may take time, but it never stops searching for a way back, share this story with someone who needs to hear it.
I kept this house standing for 20 years because I believe my boys mind their way back.
She had nothing left to fight with.
There is nothing left to sell, no one left to call, and no way left to fight them.
Then 3 black cars stopped outside her gate.
She spent 20 years losing everything because of our family's lies. No one takes her home today.
3 men walked toward the house. She
Our
never
grandfather
left.
took us away from her when we were children, then made us believe she had forgotten us. We came back because she deserves the truth. This was in my hand when I was 8 years old. She carried me through floodwater because I could not breathe, and she never let go of me.
Celeste recognized it before she recognized
I
him.
know that flashlight. But that little boy was only 8 years old. Who are you?
They were not sent by the bank.
The bank did not send us. I am Owen, and we found every letter you wrote after they took us away from you.
They brought 73 hidden letters.
There were 73 letters hidden in our grandfather's private study. Birthday cards, Christmas you sent us was kept from us.
Every letter proved she never stopped loving them.
I wrote to all 3 of you, every birthmas, every time it stormed.
The brothers had believed she abandoned them.
We were children, and they told us you had moved on without us. For 20 years, I thought you had let us go because we were too difficult to love.
But their grandfather
never left us.
had stolen the truth.
He lied to us because he thought money could replace the woman who made us feel safe for the first time. We found every letter you ever sent us hidden in our grandfather's private study. For 20 years, he made us believe you abandoned us, and he made you believe we forgot you.
To understand why those letters mattered so much, it was necessary to go back to the winter of 2004, when Celeste Morgan was 46 years old and had almost convinced herself that God had forgotten the prayer she had whispered for half her life. Celeste lived in a small, weathered house near the edge of Pine Hollow, Tennessee, where the road narrowed into old trees and rusted mailboxes. The house had belonged to her Aunt Evelyn, a woman who believed that every home should keep a light burning near the front door in case someone needed help after dark. Evelyn had been gone for years, but Celeste kept the habit. No matter how tired she was, no matter how high the electric bill became, the porch light always came on at sunset. Celeste worked before sunrise in the laundry department at Pine Hollow Memorial Hospital. Most people never saw her there. They only saw clean sheets folded in perfect stacks, fresh towels delivered to rooms, and uniforms pressed before the next shift began. At night, she cleaned the county archive building, where old records slept beneath dust and locked glass cabinets. Her days were long, her income was small, and her hands were always dry from soap and bleach. Still, Celeste gave what she could. She brought extra food to the church pantry. She volunteered twice a month at a weekend program for children waiting to be placed in foster homes. She kept a box of winter coats in her hallway closet. Most of them donated. Some bought one at a time from thrift stores after payday. The children who came through the program knew her as the woman who remembered their favorite snacks, who never forced them to speak before they were ready, and who understood that a child could be loud, rude, withdrawn, or angry without being bad. Years earlier, Celeste had lost 2 pregnancies. The second loss had nearly taken her life. After that, doctors told her that another pregnancy would be too dangerous. She had spent months grieving a future that no longer seemed possible, then years learning to live with the empty space it left behind. But she never stopped wanting to be a mother. She simply stopped saying it out loud. One rainy evening in November, after 2 exhausting shifts and a bus ride home, Celeste unlocked her front door and found a message blinking on her answering machine. It was from Cassandra Reed, a social worker who had known Celeste through the weekend foster program. Cassandra had a problem that could not wait until morning. 3 brothers had lost both parents in a highway accident several weeks earlier. Their father, Daniel Vale, had been driving home with his wife after visiting family in another county when a delivery truck crossed the center line during a storm. Daniel and his wife died at the scene. Their son survived because they were asleep in the back seat. The oldest boy was 14-year-old Owen. The middle brother, Mateo, was 11. The youngest, Silas, was 8. In the weeks after the funeral, the boys had been moved from emergency placement to emergency placement. One family agreed to take Owen, but not the younger two. Another said Mateo was too angry. A third said Silas's silence made them uncomfortable. The brothers had already begun to understand a terrible truth. People were willing to help them only if helping did not cost too much. The state was preparing to separate them. Cassandra knew Celeste's home was small. She knew Celeste did not have much money. She also knew Celeste had completed emergency caregiver training, passed the required background checks, and had been waiting for a placement that needed someone willing to care for children who had already learned not to trust promises. Celeste called Cassandra back before taking off her coat. By midnight, she had cleared the guest room, spread blankets across the old sofa, and pulled every extra pillow from the linen closet. She cooked a pot of chicken soup, though she had no idea whether any of the boys would eat it. Then she turned on the porch light and waited. The boys arrived after 1 in the morning. Owen entered first. He was tall for his age, thin in the way children become thin when stress replaces appetite, and he carried a backpack that looked too small to contain a life. Mateo followed with his hands clenched inside the sleeves of an oversized hoodie. Silas came last, holding a plastic grocery bag filled with folded paper stars. Celeste noticed immediately that none of them looked around the house with curiosity. They looked around it like prisoners measuring a cell. They had learned not to get comfortable. Celeste did not ask them to call her anything. She did not tell them everything would be fine. She did not ask them to smile for the social worker or say thank you for the soup. She simply told them there was food in the kitchen, clean blankets in the bedrooms, and enough room for all 3 of them to stay together. That first night, Owen slept in his clothes with his backpack under his arm. Mateo refused to eat until nearly 3 in the morning, when he thought nobody was watching. Silas sat by the window, folding and unfolding the same paper star until the corners tore. Celeste did not force him to stop. The first weeks were difficult in ways that no foster training manual could fully explain. Owen hid food under his bed: bread, crackers, fruit cups, even half a sandwich wrapped in a napkin. At first, Celeste found it and almost scolded him. Then she remembered something she had heard from another foster parent years earlier. Children who have been moved too often do not hoard food because they are greedy. They hoard it because they do not believe breakfast is guaranteed. So Celeste placed a small basket in the pantry and told the boys it belonged to them. It was always stocked with crackers, fruit, cereal bars, and anything else she could afford. Nobody had to ask permission to take from it. Nobody had to hide it. Owen did not trust the basket at first. But after several weeks, the food under his bed began to disappear. Mateo struggled differently. He carried his grief like a match held too close to gasoline. A wrong look at school could set him off. A careless joke about his parents could make him swing before he had time to think. He had been suspended twice before Christmas, and once after, not because he enjoyed hurting people, but because anger was the only feeling he knew how to express without falling apart. Celeste did not excuse what he did, but she refused to define him by it. She introduced him to George Bell, a retired firefighter who ran a small woodworking program for boys at the community center. George had lost a son in the military years earlier and understood the language of grief that came out through broken things. At the workshop, Mateo learned to sand rough edges until they became smooth. He learned to measure twice before cutting once. He learned that strength could be useful without being dangerous. The first thing he made was a crooked wooden shelf for Celeste's kitchen. She hung it anyway. Silas remained quiet. For almost 2 months, he spoke only with his eyes, his hands, and the paper stars he folded from scraps of newspaper, old schoolwork sheets, and grocery lists. He lined them on the windowsill of his room, then moved them to the dining table, then placed one beside Celeste's coffee mug each morning. She never asked what they meant. She only kept them safe. Celeste had 4 rules in her home. The first was that whenever possible, everyone ate together. The second was that nobody would be punished for telling the truth. The third was that anger could be taken outside, written down, cried out, or worked through, but it could not be used to wound someone else. The fourth rule was the most important. The porch light stayed on until everyone was home. At first, the boys thought the rule was strange. Then they began to understand it. The porch light was not only for strangers, it was for Owen when he came home late from helping George fix a broken fence. It was for Mateo after detention. It was for Silas when he woke from nightmares and needed to stand on the porch steps, looking at something warm against the darkness. It was Celeste's way of telling them that no matter how difficult the day had been, there was still a place waiting for them. For a while, Pine Hollow watched from a distance. Some people were kind. The women at the church brought casseroles. George gave Mateo spare tools. A teacher at Silas's school quietly donated books with large pictures because she had noticed he liked to trace the drawings with his fingers. The woman at the grocery store began saving bruised apples for Celeste at a discount. But not everyone approved. Mabel Crew, who ran the weekly Pine Hollow Bulletin, had spent most of her life collecting other people's mistakes and turning them into public entertainment. She was the kind of woman who claimed she only cared about the community, while making sure every rumor reached the community before the truth did. Mabel began with questions that sounded harmless. She wondered aloud how a woman with 2 jobs could properly care for 3 boys. She asked why the county would place children in an old house with a leaking roof. She hinted that Celeste might be accepting foster payments for reasons that had nothing to do with love. The rumors spread because rumors always spread faster in places where people know each other's business, but rarely know each other's pain. Celeste heard them. She heard the whispers in grocery store aisles. She saw the looks when she walked into church with the boys. She noticed people growing quiet when she approached, but she did not fight every lie. She was too busy building a home. By spring, Owen had started helping her repair the back fence. He had a talent for fixing things without making a fuss about it. He could look at a loose hinge, a broken drawer, or a warped board, and somehow understand what it needed. Celeste began saving small amounts from every paycheck to buy materials. Owen gave up asking why she was spending money on a house that was barely standing and began helping her make it stronger. Mateo's grades improved, not because he suddenly became interested in school, but because George taught him how to take pride in learning something difficult. He started staying after class to work on math with a teacher who had once been afraid of him. He still had a temper, but now he knew anger did not have to decide who he became. Silas spoke for the first time on a quiet Sunday afternoon. Celeste had fallen asleep in the chair after cleaning the archive building overnight. The boys were in the kitchen, making grilled cheese sandwiches with more butter than necessary. Silas stood near the counter, watching smoke rise from a pan that had been left too long on the stove. Then he said one word. He said Celeste's name. Owen dropped the spatula. Mateo froze. Celeste woke so fast that she nearly knocked over her coffee. Silas looked embarrassed, as if he had broken something by speaking. But Celeste did not rush him. She simply smiled and told him she had heard him. That was enough. The real turning point came during the flood. In late January of 2006, Pine Hollow was hit by 3 days of relentless rain. The river rose. Roads vanished under brown water. Power lines fell across backyards. The town had seen storms before, but not like this. By the third night, the electricity in Celeste's house went out. The boys gathered in the living room under blankets, while rain hammered the roof. Water crept beneath the back door. The porch light flickered, dimmed, then went dark for the first time in years. Silas had always been afraid of storms after the accident that killed his parents. But that night, his fear became something worse. His breathing tightened. His chest began to rise and fall too fast. The inhaler he had been prescribed was nearly empty, and the nearest hospital was across several flooded roads. Celeste tried the phone. There was no signal. She tried her car. The engine turned once, then died. The volunteer fire station was less than a mile away, but between the house and the station was a stretch of road already covered in water. Mateo wanted to go. Owen wanted to carry Silas. Celeste knew none of them could manage it alone. So she wrapped Silas in blankets, gave Owen an old flashlight, and told Mateo to stay close behind them. Then she stepped out into the storm. The water was freezing. The wind cut through their clothes. At one point, Celeste slipped near a ditch hidden beneath the floodwater and nearly lost her footing. Owen grabbed her arm before she fell. Mateo held Silas tight against his chest, even though fear had made him shake from head to toe. They reached the fire station just before Silas's breathing became dangerously shallow. The volunteers got him to the hospital in a rescue truck. Doctors later said that the timing had mattered. Celeste spent the rest of the night sitting in a plastic chair beside Silas's hospital bed. Her shoes were still wet. Her hands were raw from cold. She had not slept in more than 20 hours. When Silas woke, he looked at her for a long time. Then he gave her a name that did not appear on any government document. He called her Mama Celeste. Not loudly, not perfectly, but clearly enough for Owen and Mateo to hear. Neither of the older boys said anything. They did not need to. From that day forward, the house on the edge of Pine Hollow was no longer a temporary placement. It was home. Owen carved a small wooden sign and hung it near the porch. It read, "The Morgan Home." Mateo built a narrow bench beneath the front window. Silas placed paper stars along the ledge, one for every night the porch light had stayed on. For the first time since their parents died, the boys began planning for the future. Owen talked about becoming a contractor. Mateo wanted to build furniture. Silas had started making little drawings of houses with yellow lights in the windows. Celeste began the paperwork to move from emergency placement to long-term guardianship. And then Alistair Vale arrived. He came in a black car with a driver, 2 attorneys, and the kind of quiet confidence that made people step aside before he asked them to. Alistair was the father of Daniel Vale, the boy's late father. He was also the founder of Vale Holdings, a regional construction company that had grown into a national corporation. For years, Alistair and Daniel had been estranged. Daniel had walked away from the family business after Alistair refused to accept the life he wanted. He had married a woman Alistair considered beneath the expectations of the Vale name. He had moved away, worked ordinary jobs, raised his sons without asking his father for money, and kept the boys far from a world built on appearances. When Daniel and his wife died, Alistair had been notified through legal channels, but at the time, he had chosen not to act. The boys were grieving. The situation was complicated, and Alistair did not want public attention around a family conflict he had spent years pretending did not exist. Then an insurance settlement connected to the accident began moving through probate court. The existence of 3 minor heirs became impossible for him to ignore. Suddenly, Alistair discovered the importance of family. He told the court that he could offer the boys stability, education, medical care, private tutors and a financial future Celeste could never provide. His attorneys pointed to the house's old wiring, the repairs Celeste could not yet afford, and the fact that her emergency caregiver status had not been converted into permanent guardianship. They did not accuse Celeste of cruelty. They did something more devastating. They made love sound insufficient. Cassandra testified that the boys were attached to Celeste and that separating them from her could cause lasting harm. George spoke about Mateo's progress. Teachers described Owen's new confidence and Silas's return to speech. But under state rules, biological kinship carried weight, and Alistair's attorneys knew how to turn every weakness in Celeste's life into evidence that she could not compete. The judge did not say Celeste had failed. The judge said the boys would be placed with their grandfather for their future. To Celeste, the difference meant nothing. The day they left was colder than the night of the flood. Owen stood on the porch for a long time, staring at the sign he had made. Mateo kept wiping his face with the sleeve of his jacket, angry at himself for crying. Silas held the battered flashlight from the flood night against his chest. Celeste packed what the boys were allowed to bring. Most of it was not much: clothes, school books, a few photographs, Mateo's first woodworking project, some paper stars. Before leaving, Owen slipped a folded piece of paper into the kitchen drawer. Celeste did not find it until later that night. It was a map of the house, drawn in pencil. The front porch was marked with a small yellow circle. Underneath it, Owen had written that they would remember where the light was. For a while, Celeste believed that promise would be enough. It was not. Alistair moved the boys into his estate outside Nashville. He told everyone that he was giving them a better life. But better, in his world, meant controlled. Owen was sent to a private academy that taught him how to speak in rooms full of powerful men. Mateo was placed in a strict boarding school after several angry outbursts. Silas was enrolled in a program designed to make him more polished, more composed, and less emotional. They were not physically abandoned, but they were emotionally managed. Whenever the boys asked about Celeste, Alistair gave them versions of the same story. He suggested that she had moved on. He implied that she had accepted the money the state had provided and chosen not to remain involved. He told them letters had not come because there was nothing to receive. At the same time, Celeste wrote. She wrote on birthdays. She wrote at Christmas. She wrote whenever she heard that a storm had passed through Nashville and wondered whether Silas still feared thunder. She wrote to Owen about home repairs. She wrote to Mateo about the old workshop tools George had left for him. She wrote to all three boys about the porch light. The letters never arrived. Mabel Crew made things worse in Pine Hollow. After the court ruling, she wrote a carefully worded article suggesting Celeste had lost the boys because the county had concerns about her care. She never directly accused Celeste of abuse. She did not need to. She used phrases like troubling circumstances and questions about stability. In a small town, vague words could destroy a reputation more effectively than a direct lie. Celeste lost her evening cleaning job at the archive after a board member complained that the county should avoid controversy. Some parents stopped letting their children attend the weekend foster program if Celeste was there. The church pantry, where she had volunteered for years, quietly asked her to take a break. The woman who had opened her home to 3 grieving boys became someone people crossed the street to avoid. Still, every night, she turned on the porch light. Years passed. The roof was repaired one patch at a time. The garden behind the house grew wild, then was cut back, then grew again. The boys became men. Owen learned the business Alistair wanted him to learn. but he never became blind to what power could do. Matteo became a skilled furniture maker and later founded a company that hired young people leaving foster care. Silas, who had once folded paper stars in silence, became a documentary editor. He built stories from old footage, forgotten letters, and details other people missed. They stayed close to one another because they had learned early that brothers were not simply relatives. They were witnesses. As adults, they began asking harder questions about their childhood. Owen remembered the basket of food in Celeste's pantry. Matteo remembered the shelf he had built. Silas remembered the warm circle of porch light reflected in floodwater. None of those memories matched the version of Celeste that Alistair had described. When Alistair died, the brothers inherited more money than they had ever wanted, and more answers than they were prepared to face. Among the documents in his private study was a locked cabinet. The key was found in a sealed envelope addressed to the estate executor. Inside were the letters, dozens of them, some still unopened. There were also notes from Alistair's staff, records showing that correspondence had been intercepted, calls from Celeste had been blocked, and school administrators had been instructed not to share the boys' contact information with her. For 20 years, Alistair had allowed his grandsons to believe the woman who saved them had stopped caring. For 20 years, he had allowed Celeste to believe the boys had forgotten her. The brothers began searching for her immediately. But Pine Hollow had changed. Records were incomplete. Celeste had withdrawn from almost every public part of her life. Her house was still listed under an old family trust in Evelyn Morgan's name. Mabel's old articles falsely suggested Celeste had left town years earlier. Every lead seemed to end in another dead file, another wrong address, another person who remembered her only through rumor. Then, nearly 4 years later, Silas found a hospital billing record connected to an old charity program. It led them back to Pine Hollow. It led them to a foreclosure notice. And it led them to a woman sitting alone in a dark house with one suitcase by the door, believing that the last thing she had left was about to be taken from her too. Celeste did not recognize them at first. 20 years can change a child's face so completely that memory has to search for smaller things. A way of standing. A habit of looking away when overwhelmed. A hand that turns a ring around a finger whenever anger is trying to rise. She saw Owen first in the oldest man's posture. He still carried his shoulders slightly forward, as if he were ready to shield someone smaller behind him. She saw Matteo in the way the middle brother glanced at the porch bench before looking anywhere else. And she saw Silas when the youngest man raised the battered silver flashlight and held it carefully, not as an object, but as proof that he had carried part of her with him all his life. For a moment, Celeste could not breathe. She had imagined this day so many times that reality felt almost cruel. In some versions, the boys had come back angry. In others, they had come back only long enough to explain why they had stayed away. In the saddest versions, they had never come back at all. Now they were standing in front of her, grown into men she had not been allowed to know. Owen stepped forward first. He did not begin with an excuse. He did not say that time had healed anything. He opened the briefcase and placed the letters on Celeste's kitchen table. Her hands shook when she saw her own handwriting. There were envelopes she remembered licking, closed in the middle of the night. There were stamps she had bought instead of medicine one winter because she had believed a message from a mother mattered more than comfort. There were letters she had written after cancer treatment, when she could barely hold a pen steady. There were birthday cards for boys who had become men before she was allowed to see them again. She picked up one envelope and stared at it for so long that nobody spoke. Then she looked at Owen. The grief in his face told her everything. The boys had not forgotten. They had been kept from her. The reunion did not become easy, simply because the truth had been found. There were too many missing years, too many birthdays, too many first jobs, graduations, illnesses, heartbreaks, and ordinary afternoons that should have belonged to a family, but had been stolen by pride and silence. Celeste did not rush to fill that space with speeches. She made coffee. It was what she had done whenever someone came into her home carrying pain. They sat around the same kitchen table where Owen had once hidden crackers in his pockets, where Mateo had built his crooked shelf, where Silas had left paper stars beside her mug. The wood was more worn now. The chairs did not match. The room still smelled faintly of coffee, old paint, and the lemon cleaner Celeste had used for decades. Owen told her about the letters. Mateo told her about the years they had spent wondering whether she had chosen to let them go. Silas told her that he had kept the flashlight because it was the only thing from their old life that no one had managed to take from him. Celeste listened. She did not blame them. They had been children when they were taken away. Later, they had been young men trying to survive inside a family that treated obedience like gratitude. They had believed what they were told because children often believe the adults who control the doors around them. But the truth did not erase the damage. Celeste had spent 2 decades asking herself whether she had failed them. She had wondered if Owen had become ashamed of her. She had feared Mateo had turned his anger against the world because she wasn't there to help him carry it. She had imagined Silas losing his voice again, alone in some cold room far from the house where he had first begun to speak. For 20 years, she had lived with a wound that had no explanation. Now the explanation was sitting in front of her in a stack of unopened letters. Owen told her they had not come only to apologize. The bank had scheduled the house for auction because Celeste had fallen behind after years of medical bills, property taxes, and repairs. She had never complained publicly. She had sold what she could, delayed treatment when she should not have, and tried to keep the house because it was the last place in the world where she still felt connected to the boys. Owen had already paid the debt, not as a favor that would leave her feeling indebted, not as a grand gesture for cameras. He had arranged for the home to be protected through a legal trust that Celeste controlled herself. The house would remain hers. The land would remain hers. No company, bank, or relative would ever have the power to take it from her again. Mateo had brought plans to repair the roof, reinforce the foundation, rebuild the porch, and restore the garden. But he had made one thing clear from the beginning. Nothing would be changed without Celeste's approval. They were not there to turn her home into a museum of their guilt. They were there to give her back the security she should have had all along. Silas had something different. He had spent years making documentaries about people who had been overlooked by systems larger than themselves. He knew how to find the truth inside old records, erased histories, and stories that powerful people preferred to keep buried. He had spent months gathering proof of what happened in Pine Hollow. He found the court documents showing that Celeste had never been declared abusive or dangerous. He found the licensing records showing that her only obstacles had been financial and structural, not moral. He found letters from Cassandra Reed praising Celeste's care. He found statements from teachers, George Bell, hospital staff, and neighbors who remembered the boys' improvement after moving into Celeste's home. Most of all, he found Mabel Crew's old articles. The stories had been carefully written to avoid legal